This is John Lear, and today is March 22nd, 1989. We're standing just about 8 miles due east of Groom Lake, Nevada, the super government secret test site. And just a few minutes ago, we saw one of the government extraterrestrial UFOs fly over there. We all watched it for about 7 or 8 minutes.
In a leaked video that emerged on the internet, an alleged encounter between a man and an extraterrestrial being took place at an undisclosed location within a secret base in the United States.
What are these figurines supposed to be? Would you ever think that they were meant to depict humans? Certainly don't look human to me, but it's not just because they're very old sculptures. I mean, they look intentionally not human. They look reptilian. The noses, or lack thereof, the eyes, if these were meant to resemble people, they did a bad job. Either that or these were really horrifying looking folks. But if they're not meant to be humans, then what exactly are they? The statues are often referred to as the Ubaid lizard men. The 7,000-year-old artifacts were uncovered in Iraq in the 20th century. There are theories as to what these things could be, but no definitive evidence. Unfortunately, we don't have any written records of the time, so determining the ideas behind people's artistic expression in prehistoric Mesopotamia, it's not really the easiest, but I'm pretty fascinated by the idea that there may have been some reptilian aliens visiting Earth around this time that people were depicting here.
Definitive proof of life beyond our planet found inside of a meteorite that landed in Sri Lanka back in December of 2013. Yeah. When pieces of the space rock were gathered and examined back in 2013, a shocking discovery was made. The debris of the meteor contained fossils, algae fossils, of clear extraterrestrial origin, according to lead scientist Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe. Because algae is technically alive, if Professor Chandra's science is correct, the discovery marks the first documented discovery of life that originated from outside of our atmosphere. While the legitimacy of the work has been debated amongst Chandra's peers, who claim that the algae may have been embedded into the meteorite during its time on Earth, the professor is standing firm in his discovery and has claimed that among the algae fossils he discovered were other organisms that are not yet identified and do not match anything discovered on Earth thus far, which of course is great news for those of us who are really hoping that Chandra's discovery of extraterrestrial life is legitimate and that the doubters are just mad they weren't able to make the discovery for themselves.
Are these sculptures of planes? They kind of look like stylized planes to me, but that would be impossible because these are thousands of years old. They're artifacts from what is known as the Kumbaya period, a pre-Columbian culture which was around from about 500 BC to 680. They were known for their skill in metalwork. I mean, obviously these things are lovely, but yeah, they really do look remarkably like modern airplanes. They have wings that don't really look like bird wings to me, and a lot of them even have what look like tail fins. So how and why were these created? Did these people somehow have knowledge of what the future of air travel was going to look like? Were they encountering beings with highly advanced technology? The official explanation is that these are depictions of animals, insects, birds, that sort of thing, and yeah, there's a very good chance that's all these are, but I can't deny how eerily accurate they look to modern flying machines. And here's another really interesting thing. In 1994, a group of German engineers actually built scale models of the Kumbaya artifacts to see if they could fly, and guess what? They did, with an added propulsion system of course, but the designs worked. They were aerodynamically perfect and could fly.
The Williams Enigmalith. What is it? Well, I'm not entirely sure, but it's definitely from out of this world. It looks a bit like a rock with a plug, but it's not a rock with a plug, and it's far from being just an ordinary rock. The object was found in 1998 by a hiker named John J. Williams. He noticed a strange piece of metal coming out of the dirt on his hiking trail, and so he dug it up. When he did, he revealed a rock with 3 metal prongs sticking out of it. It looked somehow man-made and appeared appeared to have some kind of electrical component to it. Why? Well, I'm not sure. But Williams, who is an electrical engineer, claims that the electronic component embedded in the stone was not glued or welded into the granite rock surrounding it, meaning that while it appears to have possibly been man-made, because electrical components don't just naturally exist inside of rocks, especially ones dated to be around 100,000 years old, it must be something else, perhaps from somewhere else, perhaps somewhere out of this world. While Williams is open to having others research the strange rock, he does have a few conditions. He must be present for whatever discovery is made, and the rock must remain unharmed. Even with these parameters, you would think that by using modern day tools and technology, we would have been able to get an answer as to what exactly the rock is by now, and where the electrical component is coming from and how it was embedded. But no such discovery has been made, leaving the leading theory to be that its origins are likely not of this earth, and that it likely holds the answers to questions we haven't even thought to ask yet.
At the time of this recording, NASA has just launched a craft the other day set to head to Jupiter's moon to discover if life exists there. On October 14th, NASA launched the Europa Clipper spacecraft on a mission to explore Jupiter's moon, Europa, which scientists believe might have conditions suitable for life. The spacecraft lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket. This mission aims to investigate Europa's subsurface ocean, hidden beneath an ice shell that could be up to 25 kilometers thick. Europa is about a quarter of the size of Earth, but it's believed to contain twice as much water as all of Earth's oceans combined. This makes it one of the most promising locations for finding potential life out in space, at least that we know of. The Europa Clipper is the largest spacecraft ever built for a planetary mission. It's about 100 feet long, equipped with 9 scientific instruments designed to measure the internal ocean and analyze the composition of the moon's surface. The spacecraft will conduct 49 close flybys of Europa starting in 2031, getting as close as 15.5 miles to the surface. So unfortunately, we do have quite a while to wait before we hear anything, but the fact that NASA is actively seeking out life on a distant moon is pretty cool. Fingers crossed they find something. Just last year, NASA released a highly anticipated 36-page report on UFOs, or UAPs, and there were some interesting takeaways. They looked into hundreds of sightings but concluded that they didn't find any solid evidence that aliens were behind any of them. Still, they didn't completely rule out the possibility either. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson made it clear that the agency is stepping up its game in researching these mysterious encounters. He said they'll be using better tech and artificial intelligence to dig deeper into them. The report is pretty technical, but one key takeaway is that it stated there is no reason to conclude extraterrestrial sources are responsible for these sightings. But the report also didn't deny the possibility of, quote, potential unknown alien technology operating in Earth's atmosphere. So that's pretty cool. Nicola Fox, who's part of NASA's Science Mission Directorate, said UAPs are still one of our planet's biggest mysteries. The challenge? A lot of the data they have just isn't good enough to draw any solid conclusions about what these sightings really are. To tackle this, NASA brought in a new director of UAP research, but they're keeping their identity a secret. This person will build a database to track and analyze future sightings, and using AI and machine learning. It's a smart move, especially since Dr. Daniel Evans mentioned that some members of the UAP panel had faced, quote, actual threats, which is unsettling. So keeping the new director's identity hidden is really about protecting their safety. The Falcon Lake incident began on May 20th, 1967 in Falcon Lake, Manitoba, Canada. This event has often been called Canada's best documented UFO case, and for good reason. It all started with Stephen McCallick, an industrial mechanic and amateur geologist. He was exploring the area in search of precious metals when he suddenly heard a commotion from a flock of geese, and he looked up to see 2 strange objects hovering about 150 feet away, which he described as cigarette-shaped things with humps in the middle, glowing with a reddish hue. One of the crafts then landed on a nearby rocky platform, transforming into a shiny disc that looked like, quote, hot stainless steel. McCallick sketched the craft for about a half an hour before deciding that he wanted to get a closer look. As he approached, he noticed it was completely smooth, but the craft had an open door where he could hear muffled voices. Then he reached out and touched the craft, which was so hot it melted the fingertips of his gloves. As he turned to leave, understandably, a panel then opened up, releasing a blast of heated gas that knocked him back, setting his clothes on fire. McCulloch barely managed to escape, feeling nauseous and disoriented. He was so sick he was unable to eat solid food in the days following the incident, and was treated for burns that doctors said resembled radiation injuries. His story caught the attention of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and even US authorities. And when they reached the site that McCulloch said he spotted the craft, authorities found a 15-foot ring of burnt vegetation, and there were highly radioactive elements found in soil samples and in the clothing McCulloch had been wearing on the day of the encounter, which he had to rip off because they were on fire. And there was also superheated metal that had melted into the cracks of rocks, also highly radioactive. Till this day, the case has not been explained. This incident is referred to as South Africa's Roswell, the Kalahari crash. Kind of tells you how significant this one was. So the story goes that this whole incident was covered up. Some of the details of this one are a bit vague, and some chalk this up to being a hoax, but there were supposed leaked documents describing the following events. So this was an unusual event that took place over the Indian Ocean on May 7th, 1989. According to reports, a fast-moving object, believed to be a UFO, was spotted by naval personnel. In response, fighter jets were sent to intercept and target it. The UFO was successfully hit and crashed in the Kalahari Desert, leaving a noticeable skid mark. Shortly after the crash, a US recovery team was swiftly deployed to gather evidence from the site and transport it to Patterson Air Force Base. And not only were parts of the aircraft retrieved, but the bodies of 2 alien beings as well. The Tic Tac UFO incident is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the world of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. On November 14th of 2004, retired Navy Commander David Fravor, a pilot with the USS Nimitz, had an encounter during a training exercise off the coast of Southern California. Fravor was flying with Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich when they were directed to investigate an unusual radar signal detected by the USS Princeton, another ship in their strike group. The radar operators had spotted, quote, multiple anomalous aerial vehicles that descended from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. Fravor and Dietrich diverted to get a closer look, and as they approached, Fravor described seeing a small white object that looked almost like a Tic Tac, hovering above the ocean waves. He recalled in a 2021 interview that the object seemed to respond to their movements, as if it was aware that they were there. The Tic Tac was about the size of Fravor's jet, but had no visible markings, no wings or exhaust plumes. He attempted to cut it off, but the object accelerated away so quickly that it vanished from sight, only to be detected 60 miles away in less than a minute. Fravor stated, "I think what we experienced was well beyond the material science and the capabilities that we had at the time, that we have currently, or that we're going to have in the next 10 to 20 years. This incident came out in a report revealing over 500 sightings since 2004, some of which, including this one, are still unexplained.
Starting off our list today, we have a 2018 UFO sighting that took place in the skies above North Carolina. Shout out to anyone watching from Elon University. In August of 2018, a man named Javion Hill claims to have spotted a UFO while driving home on US 74 just southwest of Charlotte. He described seeing lights in the clouds above him, shaped like a square. Immediately, he pulled out his phone and began snapping photos, which I have to admit are pretty convincing. After hovering in the sky above Javion for a good amount of time, the illuminated formation just vanished into thin air, as they do. You know how it is. It was as though it had never existed in the first place, but of course it did because there's proof, and we've seen it. And Hill, who says he was never a believer in aliens before that night, claims that during the time in which the object was hovering above him, he was seriously concerned for his safety.
On June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, saw something in the sky near Mount Rainier in Washington, something that he couldn't quite explain. He described 9 strange crescent-shaped objects flying in a V formation, What really caught his attention was how fast these things were moving, at around 1,700 miles per hour, which was faster than any known aircraft at the time. And when Arnold reported what he saw, it ended up getting massive media coverage. The Kenneth Arnold sighting is often referenced as the first big UFO encounter in modern times. After Arnold's sighting, lots of other reports started coming in about strange things in the sky across the United States. The government and military were getting intrigued, and the US Air Force started Project Sign, which was the first official government investigation into UFOs. This later became Project Blue Book, which looked into thousands of UFO sightings to try and figure out what was going on. So is it just one of these cases where he saw something and then everybody else started like getting excited and, just thought they were seeing things? Or was this just the time where UFOs and aliens were starting to come down to investigate things here on Earth?
Next up, we have two commercial pilots on different aircrafts claiming to have seen a mysterious flying object in the sky while flying above Arizona on February 24th of 2018. The first pilot to spot the UFO called into radio traffic control to ask if another plane had passed by him. The controller answered no, and then went on to make a joke about the pilot having possibly seen a UFO. Ground control then contacted another pilot flying an American Airlines flight a little bit behind the first plane and asked the pilot to inform the control center if an aircraft were to pass over the plane. And a short while later, the pilot did exactly that. He said that a fast object had flown 3,000 feet over his plane in the opposite direction of which he was going. Once again, ground control had no knowledge of the aircraft, and it didn't show up on any of the radars either. Both pilots later described the objects as illuminated and incredibly fast, saying that they were nothing like the weather balloons they had seen sometimes floating at that altitude before. Plus, there were no records of this object, so what could it have been? Well, a UFO, duh.
Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was the lead investigator of Project Blue Book in the 50s. His job was to investigate reports of UFOs and find any possible explanation for them. Of course, if there was none, it would be categorized as a genuine UFO. French had shot down a lot of UFO reports over the course of his career, but in 1952, he witnessed something himself, something he could only describe as a genuine alien encounter. He kept what he'd seen a secret for decades. It wasn't until 2013 that he testified before 6 former members of Congress in DC, describing an event that happened back in 1952. A number of residents off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland, had reported spotting 2 unidentified flying objects. So French was tasked with heading over to Canada to basically debunk it. The UFOs had crashed into the water, and when Lieutenant Colonel French arrived, he saw this crowd of about 100 people, including some police, standing by a wharf, gawking at something in the water. French made his way over, and when he looked down into the clear water below, he saw what looked like 2 large circular aircraft-like objects, and there were apparently 2 beings working on them. French described the creatures as, quote, 2 to 3 feet tall, light gray in color, very thin, long arms with either 2 or 3 fingers, the top of their heads much wider than their jawline. Their eyes were very slanted, and you couldn't see pupils in them. He then described the objects slowly rising out from the water before abruptly accelerating and taking off into the sky.
Next up, we have the very first record of a UFO encounter to take place in New England, USA, which I bet you didn't know was actually a major hotspot for extraterrestrial UFO and UAP activity. That's unidentified aerial phenomena, for those of you who don't know. The first recorded sighting happened in Boston, New England, and it was also the first ever documented sighting in the US as a whole. It took place in 1639, and credible reports have been popping up ever since. The record was a second-hand observation recorded by colony founder and governor at the time, John Winthrop, who wrote that a sober, discreet man had seen the sky above Boston become illuminated by a green light while he was rowing his boat along the river one evening. The light was still for a moment and appeared to be flaming, and then it morphed its shape and darted off into the night sky towards Charlestown. The encounter lasted for 3 hours, with the object in the sky going higher into the air and then rushing down closer to Earth again and again, back and forth. By the time it ended, which it did when the object just disappeared into the night, the man along with his boatmates had traveled 1 mile upstream with absolutely no memory of how they had gotten there. For so long we have looked for life in space within the parameters of what constitutes life to us: DNA, RNA, and nucleic acids. But there is a theory, the different kind of life theory, that states this is the reason why we haven't been successful in our search, because life outside of Earth does not need any of the things that we do to survive. Their cells get instructions in biochemical ways completely different from our own. Going off of this, one can assume that planets previously deemed as uninhabitable and therefore removed from the search area for extraterrestrial life might actually be the exact place where alien life forms could be found. The statement that only 1 in a million planets have the right combination of chemicals, temperature, water, days, and nights to support planetary life as we know it completely discounts planetary life as we don't. Extraterrestrials who operate on an incredibly different fundamental and chemical level than our own might be lurking right in our cosmic backyard, we just haven't been searching for them properly. The faraway theory is a pretty straightforward one. The reason we have yet to find aliens is because they are too far away and moving further away by the minute. Basically, the theory states that due to the expansion of the universe, galaxies are constantly moving further and further away from one another, and the further they become, the faster they move, which means it's highly likely that we miss that sweet spot of alien interaction due to the fact that our society was just too underdeveloped when aliens inhabited galaxies that were close enough to communicate with. Either that or humanity didn't miss it, but we did, because it already happened some 6,000 years ago, which would explain the pyramids and many ancient civilizations' fascinations with the stars. Either way, we're SOL for distance. But maybe we haven't found aliens yet because we haven't been communicating properly. Here's the thing. For the better half of a century, humanity has been leaking radio signals into space at such a rate that any intelligent life form within 100 light years of Earth would surely be able to pick up the signal. But as tech improves, these radio leaks reduce, and one day they might disappear altogether, and the Earth might fall back into radio silence. Perhaps the same is the case for other planets, and the reason we haven't been able to hear their radio signals and they haven't heard any of ours is simply because in the cosmic scope of time, the radio signals just don't last that long and our timing is off. In 1974, however, humanity did make a direct attempt at communicating with aliens by beaming an interstellar message out towards a globular cluster 25,000 light years away. The only problem is that for anyone to receive the message, they would have to be situated directly in the path of the beam. Not only that, but the message took less than 3 minutes to transit, meaning even if an intelligent extraterrestrial civilization was perfectly situated in the path, they would have had less than 3 minutes to detect the signal. While it seems unlikely, it is possible that in 1977 we got lucky enough to detect a beam coming from an advanced extraterrestrial civilization down to Earth. A momentary burst of energy known as the wow signal swept across the planet, but we have not been able to figure out its origin or been able to detect it since we heard it the first time. In 2012, however, we did send back a response, but we have yet to hear back from whoever sent the wow signal. Perhaps, though, the reason we have yet to interact with intelligent life forms is because the universe has filtered them out, and one day it will filter us out too. Basically, what I'm saying is that humanity and all other life forms have an expiry date that is pre-wired into our experience and that prohibits us from ever reaching the point of extraterrestrial communications and other planetary colonizations. Why? I'm not sure, but I'm assuming it's to protect the universe somehow. I mean, let's think about it. Let's say right now is the perfect time for life to exist on Earth, and one day, long after we're gone, it will be the perfect time for life to exist on, say, Venus. If we had already found a way to migrate to Venus and subsequently developed it to our liking and then polluted it beyond repair, the life that was supposed to exist there after we had moved on to the next planet would have zero chance at survival. So maybe the expiration date encoded into each and every living being across the universe is to allow each and every being to have its moment in time to exist. Branching off of that theory, the Great Filter Theory, we have the self-destruction theory, which is similar but just a bit different because instead of the universe giving us an expiration date pre-coded into our existence, self-destruction theory states that life on every planet is destined to kill itself in order to protect the planet itself rather than the universe as a whole. Like I said, the theories are really similar, but one is a universal law and one is planetary preservation. Self-destruction theory comes from the Medea hypothesis, which is based off Medea from Greek mythology, who killed her offspring. Basically, our planet is Medea and we are the offspring. The very thing that gave us life is destined to kill us as we take away its own life force. An example of this is the Ice Ages, which those who follow the self-destruction theory would blame on an excess of plants, which absorbed an excess amount of CO2, which led to extreme global cooling, greatly damaging the integrity of life on Earth. Now we've come in. We've killed off a bunch of plants, we've warmed the Earth up, but we warmed it up too much, and we've killed off a bunch of other living things. And this, once again, has greatly damaged the integrity of life on Earth, meaning that at some point in time before we are able to achieve an intelligence level that allows us to communicate and commute to these aliens, something is bound to come in and kill off humanity. Do you see what I'm saying?
What is Majestic 12? Well, if you're super into alien conspiracy stuff, you'll have seen them crop up all over the place. Said to be a top secret organization consisting of scientists, military leaders, and government officials who investigate alien spacecraft. Some even say they not only have direct contact with extraterrestrials, but work with them as well. Being given access to their technology, in exchange they cover up the aliens' presence on Earth while allowing them to study us. But that's a more outlandish version of the conspiracy. At the core though, they're said to at least have knowledge of aliens, and maybe even work on reverse engineering their technology, doing alien autopsies on extraterrestrials that have crash landed on Earth, that sort of thing. This is basically what Bob Lazar was claiming to have seen while working at Area 51. You could start to see how much Majestic 12, or MJ-12 as they're often called, are really at the core of almost every United States government alien conspiracy. The JFK assassination is often described as the mother of all conspiracies, and yes, with just a little digging, you'll find that MJ-12 is mentioned here too. Some people believe that Kennedy found out about MJ-12 and the secret dealings they had with aliens. Supposedly, he wanted to reveal the truth to the American public, thinking they had a right to know. This of course didn't sit well with MJ-12, who were determined to keep everything under wraps. On top of that, or maybe alternatively, depending on who you talk to, Kennedy was sticking his nose where MJ-12 didn't want him to, trying to have the US and the Soviets work together, but this would mean sharing sensitive information with them about UFOs, and MJ-12 didn't want that. One piece of evidence that fueled this theory is a document called the Burned Memo. This document surfaced in the 90s, and it's said to be a memo from an MJ-12 member ordering someone to essentially terminate Kennedy, using coded language of course. The memo mentions Lancer, which was Kennedy's Secret Service code name. Now another part of the theory involves a speech Kennedy gave at the United Nations in 1963, where he talked about the need for cooperation between the US and the Soviet Union, even suggesting they should work together in space exploration. So some believe this was a veiled reference that he was making for his desire to share UFO secrets with the world. There's also a memo that Kennedy sent to the CIA asking for a review of UFO files. He wanted to be debriefed on the unknowns, as he referred to them as in the memo. And what's very eerie is that this memo was dated just 10 days before he was killed. So, did MJ-12 see him as a threat to their secrecy and decided they needed to dispose of him? Now, how exactly did MJ-12 get started? Well, for that, we gotta go all the way back to the Roswell incident. Just how many dots are we gonna be connecting in this video? I told you, these guys are everywhere. So in July of 1947, something crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. The military first reported it as a flying disc, and this news spread like wildfire. But soon after, the story was changed. They claimed it was now just a weather balloon. So why this quick switch up? Was it really just a weather balloon, or was something else going on? Well, according to some, there was 100% something else going on. There are a lot of people who think the government was hiding something big. They suspected that the military had actually recovered an alien spacecraft and possibly even alien bodies from that crash site. This theory got stronger over the years as more people, including supposed whistleblowers, came forward with their own stories. MJ-12 is said to have spawned out of this Roswell incident, a secret group created by President Harry Truman. Story goes that the group was formed to manage and cover up all information about UFOs and extraterrestrials, particularly what was found at Roswell, and apparently they've been operating in the shadows ever since. But when did the rumors about MJ-12 begin? I mean, if they're so top secret, how did word about them start spreading in the first place? Well, the origins of the Majestic 12 conspiracy go back to the 80s. So in 1984, a UFO researcher named Jamie Shendere got an envelope in the mail with some film inside. When he developed the film, it apparently showed 8 pages of documents that looked like they were briefing papers for something called Operation Majestic 12. These papers described a secret group of 12 people, the names of scientists, military leaders, and government officials. More on them later. Then on May 31st, 1987, a British UFO researcher named Timothy Good claimed that he had documents from the 50s that revealed a secret committee called Majestic 12. And these documents apparently detailed everything I just outlined. This group was formed in 1947 by an order from President Harry S. Truman. The documents said the committee's job was to cover up the crash of the alien spacecraft at Roswell in July of 47. So figure out how to use the alien technology they found and decide how the US should deal with extraterrestrial life in the future. Who are some of the big names that were said to be in Majestic 12 though? Vannevar Bush was a key figure during World War II. He was a brilliant engineer and inventor, probably most famous for his work on the infamous Manhattan Project. He also helped create the National Science Foundation and was an advisor to President Roosevelt and President Truman. His name shows up in the MJ-12 documents and was allegedly part of the organization. If MJ-12 is real, Bush's inclusion would make sense. I mean, he worked on the Manhattan Project. If he was helping to build a nuclear bomb, why wouldn't he be involved in top secret UFO research? James Forrestal was the first US Secretary of Defense, appointed in 1947. Before that, he was a Secretary of the Navy. He was heavily involved in the early Cold War period, and he had access to some of the most classified information. He would have been a logical choice for a group like MJ-12. On top of that, there's always been some mystery as to the exact circumstances of his death in 1949, which some think may have had something to do with his involvement in MJ-12. Roscoe H. Hillenkotter was the first director of the CIA, serving from 1947 to 1950. He later joined the board of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which is a civilian UFO research group. Makes sense why he'd be here. These are just a few of the names, of course.
A top secret exchange program between the United States government and planet Serpo, located in the Zeta Reticuli star system, aka the planet of the short grays. The project was allegedly created under the administration of President John F. Kennedy after the US government saved the life of an alien, EVA-1, who crash landed on Earth back in 1947. Entirely grateful and forever indebted to humanity, the alien began working with the US government and teaching them about his home planet, Serpo. When EVA-1 died, he left behind communications technology, which the government then used to eventually get into contact with other Serpo natives. That is when the government made arrangements to send 12 specially trained astronauts to planet Serpo so that they may learn about life outside of our atmosphere. In order to reach Serpo, the 12 astronauts had to travel through a wormhole, after which the majority of them got sick and one unfortunately died of an aneurysm. But of course they kept going and eventually they reached the alien planet. For a decade they studied life on Serpo before returning home and assuming entirely new identities in order to protect the security of the mission. Fair enough, I suppose.
So what are the origins of this Project Serpo tale? Well, like with most conspiracies in the modern age, it started gaining popularity online and took off from there. It all started in 2005 when a series of anonymous emails began circulating among UFO researchers and enthusiasts. These emails, which were allegedly from a retired US government official who remained anonymous, laid out this insane story about an extraterrestrial exchange program. We'll talk more about this anonymous individual later. The Project Serpo story started making the rounds way faster than these types of stories would have back in the day. It was 2005, the internet was still relatively new, in the grand scheme of things anyway, and the UFO community was just hungry for new sensational stories. And this one, it's pretty much the definition of sensational.
Remember that alien that I mentioned, EVA 1, that crash landed to Earth in 1947? Yeah, well, that was actually the Roswell incident of 1947, and also the first time the US government supposedly made contact with aliens. As many of you are probably already aware, in 1947 an unidentified object crash landed on some farmland in Roswell, New Mexico. When Area 51 was alerted of the incident, they rushed to the scene, collected the object, and released a statement saying that what had come spiraling down to Earth a few nights prior was nothing more than a weather balloon. But then they sent the object out to another base for testing, and another, and another. Why? Well, because it wasn't actually a weather balloon. It was an alien spacecraft containing 6 aliens, 5 of which had died in the crash, and 1 of which came to be known as Extraterrestrial Biological Entity Number 1, or EVA 1. EVA 1 was taken to the Air Force facility in Los Alamos, where he stayed until his death in 1952. During this time, he learned to communicate with the military and told them some pretty interesting things.
Now, if the US government is really working with these alien beings, where might they be carrying out their activities? Area 51? Some hidden base in Antarctica? Well, some say they could be operating from an even more top secret place. Dulce Base. Dulce Base supposedly sits deep beneath the Colorado-New Mexico border, close to Dulce, New Mexico. Dulce Base is said to be a secret facility where humans and aliens are working together, exchanging ideas and doing all sorts of experiments, multiple levels deep underground with high-tech labs. The rumors are that different alien species, from the Greys, from planet Serpo possibly, to the reptilians, are working hand in hand with the US government. As to what they're trying to accomplish, probably something really fun and good that we don't really need to bother worrying about. Stories about this place really started coming about from a man named Paul Benowitz, who claimed to have discovered an underground base near Dulce, full of gray aliens and humans. His claims caught a lot of attention, but Benowitz's mental health eventually declined, and he ended up in a mental hospital, passed away in 2003. And there's always been this rumor that he was part of a big, widespread misinformation campaign.
As I said, during EVA 1's time on Earth, he informed the US government of quite a few things. One being that Serpo natives, Ebans as they are referred to by humans, had actually been visiting Earth for the last 2,000 years with no issue. But unfortunately, this time new Earth radar technology that they don't have on Serpo caused the ship to go haywire and crash, killing the majority of the crew. In 1949, a similar thing happened. 6 Ebans crash landed, but this time unfortunately none of them made it. When the ship was examined, the military found a communications device, which they worked on with EVA 1 to repair. They got it working and sent out multiple distress signals, but it wasn't until after EVA 1's death in 1952 that they finally got a reply. Communications began between the US military and the Ebans. It took a while, but eventually they were able to understand one another. After learning about the 12 deceased Ebans stranded on Earth, the Ebans asked if they could come to Earth and retrieve the bodies. Of course, the military wanted something in return, so they came up with the exchange program. The military wanted tech, but the Ebans said, no, you're not ready for our tech. And so they proposed something else. In exchange for the bodies of their deceased, 12 astronauts could spend a decade on planet Serpo. Furthermore, an Eban would stay on Earth to assist the military. In 1964, the Ebans landed on Earth once again to retrieve the bodies, and Project Serpo, aka Project Crystal Night, as it has also been called, commenced.
In 1975, a pilot and several passengers flying a private plane near Pine Gap's airspace saw something they would never forget. The facility had only started operating 5 years before. Everyone was wondering what the hell was really going on in there, and the passengers and crew were hoping they were gonna see something while flying overhead, and see something they did. A large white object appeared, taking off from the base at an incredibly high speed. The object moved so fast that it was nearly impossible for the witnesses to get a good look at it before it vanished into the sky. The pilot, upon landing, reported the sighting, They were told to wait for investigators, and when these investigators arrived, they supposedly told the group to keep their mouths shut about what they'd seen and to forget the incident entirely. Obviously, not all of them did, and if there wasn't already heavy speculation and controversy about this facility amongst the Australian public before, there certainly was now. Now, what exactly is the Pine Gap facility? Sitting right in the middle of the outback, not too far from the remote town of Alice Springs, officially it's known as the Joint Defense Facility Pine Gap, and it's run by both the US and Australian governments. But what exactly goes on there? Like with any facility like this, there's the official answer and the more speculative ones. The facility is decked out with some serious tech. You know those big satellite dishes you see in movies? Pine Gap has plenty of them. They're used for all sorts of high-tech communication and surveillance activity. Officially, the facility is involved in intelligence gathering, satellite tracking, and missile detection. It's always been a controversial place though. It's seen a number of protests over the years, and many of them aren't even necessarily to do with the rumors and conspiracies, but they certainly don't help with its image. Pine Gap is rumored to be a secret site for advanced technology testing. Again, much like claims made about Area 51. A place where the military can try out their fancy new tech far away from the prying eyes of the public. And if you were gonna pick a spot for a test flight over your new advanced drone or aircraft, the Australian outback would be about as ideal as it gets. Ever seen Mad Max? Nothing out there but sand and kangaroos. I don't think there's actually any kangaroos in Mad Max, but you get my point. One of the main theories is that Pine Gap is involved in developing and testing advanced drones and aircraft. These drones could be used for anything from reconnaissance missions to lethal attacks. More on that next though. There are also rumors about Pine Gap being involved in cyber warfare testing, so developing new ways to protect against hacking or creating offensive strategies to mess with enemy computers. That's really the best way I can put it without doing a deep dive into exactly what hackers do on this kind of scale. I don't really know much about hacking other than the error messages I'd get that would screw up my janky old PC in the days of LimeWire. One of the biggest conspiracies is that Pine Gap is involved in operating spy satellites. I'd say a big part of this is the fact that it's jointly operated by the United States and Australia. It's partly run by the CIA, so that leads to some speculation for sure. It's rumored that Pine Gap plays a huge role in monitoring communications, radar, and other electronic signals from all over the world. The facility's remote location and the sophisticated tech make it a pretty ideal setup for controlling and receiving data from spy satellites orbiting Earth. There's a lot of speculation that Pine Gap works with various intelligence agencies to gather information on foreign military activity, enemy organizations, and just various global threats. I mean, this is barely even in the realm of conspiracy. It is a fact. It's involved in intelligence gathering, so I don't think spy satellites are really all that much of a stretch. It's really more of a question of, well, what exactly does this entail? Of course, they don't provide specifics because that would kind of defeat the purpose of the whole spying thing. Another one of the numerous conspiracy theories surrounding Pine Gap is its alleged role as an NSA or National Security Agency listening post. Edward Snowden famously brought this up, and it certainly makes the whole thing feel a lot more credible. According to the theory, Pine Gap is involved in surveillance and data collection, targeting domestic and international communications, using its advanced listening technology to intercept phone calls, your emails. Edward Snowden isn't the only guy to come out having said this though. There are other whistleblower testimonies alleging that Pine Gap collaborates closely with the NSA to gather intelligence. Their claim is that the facility's ideal location and the powerful antennas make for intercepting large amounts of data, which is then processed and analyzed by intelligence analysts. Another intense rumor about Pine Gap is that it's involved in coordinating lethal drone strikes. Pine Gap is believed to have the tech and connections to control and direct drones used in targeted killings. So we already know they have the technology to efficiently gather intelligence and track targets. So once a target is identified, the data is sent to operators who can launch and guide drones to hit specific targets, often in remote or hard to reach areas. These drones can carry out precision strikes, taking out high value targets with little to no risk to any human soldiers. The idea that Pine Gap could be involved in operations like this, again, stems from the fact that it's another hub for for US intelligence and military agencies. So it's no secret that the US has used drones for targeted strikes in various parts of the world, and Pine Gap's advanced technology would be a major asset for this type of thing. Accusations about drone strikes have been denied, but I mean, of course, they're gonna deny something like that. Targeted drone strikes are probably the most controversial part of modern warfare. After one drone strike in July of 2013 in Pakistan, campaigners claimed the intelligence for the strike came from Pine Gap. There was a ton of outrage, and a number of human rights groups called for a UN inquiry into whether the Australian government could be seen as complicit in the strikes alongside the US military. There were even some allegations that Australian officials might have facilitated targeted killing, which would be against international law.
As James said, the Roswell incident is arguably the most famous UFO crash in history, although the government would claim otherwise. Basically, on June 24th of 1947, while searching for a crashed military aircraft, pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 UFOs flying over the Cascade Mountains of Washington state in the US. The objects were flying in formation at a height of about 10,000 feet and a speed of approximately 1,900 kilometers per hour, which was not possible at the time, for humans that is. Kenneth described the way the objects moved as jerky, like rocks skipping over the water, flashing forward at strange intervals. When the media got a hold of the story, they coined the phrase flying saucer, and the UFO craze took off at hyperspeed. Especially when on July 7th, a local rancher named Mac Brazel called the sheriff to let him know that one of those objects had somehow ended up on his farm, and this came to be known as the Roswell incident.
It was back in July of 1947 that something strange happened near Roswell, New Mexico. Something had crashed into the ground, into Brazel's farm. There were metal pieces, rubber strips, and a strange tin foil-like material. The nearby Roswell Army airfield was alerted. The military came out and collected the debris. At first, they issued a press release saying they had recovered an unknown flying disc. This really got people talking, but just a day later the Army changed their story, saying it was actually just a weather balloon. Now, while some of the public took this at face value, it caused some controversy, especially in the years to come. People started to believe that the military was covering up something much bigger, possibly an alien spacecraft crash. Over the years, people started to come forward claiming to have seen the wreckage, and not only were there strange markings on the material described by some as hieroglyphics, but the material was incredibly strong and seemed to almost be impossible to burn. Oh, and of course, people who'd been called to the site to recover the material claimed to have seen bodies that were clearly not human. Over the years, many people have questioned the official explanation for this incident. Even former military personnel and locals said they saw strange things at the crash site, like debris that didn't look like it came from any known aircraft, and even small bodies that didn't seem human. In 1994, the US Air Force released a report saying the debris was from a top secret project called Project Mogul, a project that used high altitude balloons to detect Soviet nuclear tests. They said the unusual materials found were just parts of these balloons and their sensors, but this explanation didn't satisfy everyone. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of the incident, the Air Force released another report to address the claims about these alien bodies. They said these were actually just crash test dummies used in military experiments, not extraterrestrial beings. But again, a lot of people were and still are highly skeptical of this. The Roswell incident happened less than 2 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan in 1945. Those bombs were created through a secret project that lasted 3 years and had 3 main sites, including one in New Mexico. So if the government could keep the atomic bomb a secret for so long, why wouldn't they be able and willing to hide information about a crashed UFO landing? Plus, little mannequins? I think most people would look at that and be able to tell the difference between an alien and a crash test dummy.
So this foreign object that landed on Mac Brazel's farm actually did so a few days prior to him calling into the sheriff's department. To be honest, he hadn't thought much of it until he started reading about Kenneth Arnold flying saucers and UFOs in the papers. Once he learned about the possible presence of technologically advanced ships with no known origin that likely came from outer space, he began to wonder if that was in fact what had landed on his farm just a few nights ago, and so he gathered up some of the debris and took them down to the local police station. In response, the sheriff immediately contacted the nearby army base, and soon intelligence officer Jesse Marcel had arrived on the scene and instructed Brazel to take him to the crash site so that the two could collect more debris. So let's talk about Jesse Marcel, the first military officer to step foot on the scene of the crash, because apparently Jesse had a lot to say, according to his son Jesse Jr., who went on to tell his father's story after his death in 1986. According to Jesse Jr., in 1947, when he was just 10 years old, his father woke him up in the middle of the night, excited after having visited the crash site. Jesse Jr. sat up as Jesse Sr. handed him some of the debris he had collected earlier that day on Brazel's farm, and he told Jesse Jr. to get a good look because the debris were something that he would never see again. They were not of this earth, and the pair simply could not make sense of them. Out of all of the debris his father had brought home, Jesse Jr. said that the one that fascinated him most was a small beam with purple-hued hieroglyphics. I suppose it's not difficult to see why the pair didn't believe the government when they released a report saying that what had been found on the Brazel's farm was nothing more than a discarded weather balloon. But of course, you don't mess with the government. And so for years, both Jesse Jr. and his father kept quiet about what they had seen. That is until in the late 1970s, a man named Stanton Friedman showed up asking questions. Stanton T. Friedman, a nuclear physicist turned ufologist, tracked down Jesse Sr. after being tipped off that a retired military man might know something about the Roswell incident, something that had been kept from the public for the past 31 years. And it turns out he did. Jesse Sr. told Freeman that the weather balloon story had in fact been a cover-up, and that the original wreckage had been replaced with a weather balloon shortly after military personnel first arrived on the scene. Not only that, but Jesse claimed that despite what their superiors had wanted them to believe, it was incredibly clear to everyone working on the site that the object had in fact been an extraterrestrial spaceship with outstanding craftsmanship and incredibly advanced out-of-this-world technologies. Although, unfortunately, Jesse did claim that he never got to witness the alleged aliens inside of the craft being pulled out, but still, he's ex-military, he was there. It's a pretty compelling case if you ask me.
We're gonna start off the list with a pretty insane news story that didn't really make the rounds over here, which is surprising because this is absolutely nuts. So last year, residents of a small isolated village in Peru claimed to have been attacked in the night by 7-foot-tall alien beings with glowing yellow eyes. They also had dark hoods and wore armor. They looked a bit like Green Goblin from Spider-Man. At one point, one of the beings even tried to kidnap a young woman of the village. And these attacks happened repeatedly, to the point where many villagers said they were living in fear. A number of residents claimed to have fired at the creatures, but they didn't go down. They could also fly. This was all over South American news. The Peruvian military was even called in to do night patrols. So what the hell was going on here? Well, the media has now come out saying that the attacks weren't aliens, but they were just illegal miners dressed as aliens trying to scare the villagers off. But how does that explain them being seemingly immune to bullets or flying? Carlos Castro Quintanilla, the prosecutor investigating the case, believes that the miners must have been using state-of-the-art technology that allowed them to fly. What does he think these illegal miners, what do they somehow have access to jetpacks? I don't know. I'm not buying that. I'm on the fence about this one. It could be illegal miners. Maybe they had bulletproof vests, but the jetpack thing, I've seen real life jetpacks and they are clunky messes. They're just, first of all, no one has access to those things. And even like flying them around, it's just, it's not a smooth kind of thing. We don't have jetpacks, all right? Plus, I think these villagers are smart enough to know the difference between people in masks and awful jetpacks and alien beings. I don't know. A whole bunch of these villagers all said they saw this, so it's interesting.
Next up, we have the Battle of Los Angeles, or the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, which took place on February 23rd of 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. That night, all of Los Angeles went under blackout as directed by the US military, meaning all lights were off. And while the lights on the ground had been turned off, the sky above was lit up by a myriad of strange, unidentified flying objects. The military opened fire, and onlookers were absolutely absolutely stunned as 1,400 rounds of ammunition fired up into the sky appeared to have no effect on the UFO or UFOs. Smoke filled the sky, and when it cleared, not a single craft was to be found, in the sky or on the ground. Shrapnel that appeared to have ricocheted off of the target resulted in the death of 5 civilians. 3 more were killed in car accidents due to the chaos of the event, and 2 more of heart attacks due to the stress of the 2-hour-long attack. To this day, it is unknown what objects filled the sky of Los Angeles that night. The event went down in history as one of the largest UFO sightings to date. We really don't know what happened, but if you have any theories, feel free to let us know in the comments.
Next on the list, we have the Shag Harbor incident. At 11:20 p.m. on October 4th, 1967, multiple witnesses in Nova Scotia watched as a mysterious object crashed into the waters of Shag Harbor. But let's backtrack a little and go over some of the other sightings from that night leading up to this. It all began with Air Canada Flight 305, where First Officer Robert Ralph alerted Captain Pierre Charbonneau to a strange object outside the aircraft over Sherbrooke in Saint John, Quebec. It was described as a brightly lit rectangular object with smaller lights trailing it. Meanwhile, Daryl Dory and his family in Mahone Bay saw a large object in the sky. Captain Leo Howard Mercy, a fisherman, witnessed stationary blips on his radar. He, along with his crew, then looked up to see 4 bright objects in a rectangular formation in the sky. News stations were also being flooded with numerous other people reporting glowing objects over Halifax. And then we have the crash. A ton of residents reported hearing a whoosh, followed by a loud bang, and at least 11 people reported seeing a low-flying object crash into the water of Shag Harbor. I'm sure you hear a lot of banging sounds around Shag Harbor. Terrible joke. Witnesses watched as an object with glowing lights floated in the water. It was just kind of like floating there. The RCMP was then called in, who then contacted the Rescue Coordination Center, but before they could arrive, the object started to sink into the water. The Coast Guard was called in, as well as the military. No debris or survivors were found, and according to the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax, all commercial, private, and military aircraft, they were all accounted for along the eastern seaboard. Whatever this object was, it's never been identified, and it has been officially designated as an unidentified flying object.
Next on our list today, we have the North Yorkshire, England event, which took place in 1952. Reports of a bright silver disc-shaped object the size of a large bus hovering in the sky began spreading across the country. The aircraft was witnessed by people from many different towns, as well as Royal Air Force pilots. In the days that followed, more similar objects were spotted in the skies above the county. People described the aircrafts as being even larger than the one in the first sighting, and described their maneuvers as being impossible for any known aircraft at the time. The events went on for many days and had hundreds of witnesses. Some even used radar technology to track the unknown craft, but no one was able to figure out its origin. Speculation of the UFO being an alien spaceship quickly took off, with others believing that the spherical ships belonged to the government and that they had been deployed into the sky for some kind of super secret military operation. Well, here's the thing. The event took place over 70 years ago, and the government has yet to fess up to the ships being theirs, which at this point you'd think they would have done, right? I mean, to be fair, if they did fess up by now, I probably still wouldn't believe them, but I want to know what you guys think. Alien spacecraft or yet another government cover-up story?
Number 10, UAP report. Alien fans and skeptics alike were pretty shocked when just a few months ago the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, said that they believed in aliens. Well, actually, they said they were going to be investigating unidentified flying objects, but close enough. While some people did believe that this was NASA saying, hey, we believe in aliens, it was actually them announcing they were going to launch a study into UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomenon, because I guess they're just too good to say UFO. The scientist coordinating the study said, over the decades, NASA has answered the call to tackle some of the most perplexing mysteries we know of, and this is no different. In the report, they said that a good chunk of confirmed unidentified objects seemed to show evidence that they were made using advanced technology that humans just don't have yet. Number 9, injuries. A Freedom of Information Act request caused 1,500 pages of UFO reports and evidence to be declassified and leaked to the public. And what the pages contained was pretty shocking for those who read it. A percentage of the pages included information of how people who reported seeing UFOs and aliens had been legitimately physically affected, real physical evidence that something unexplained had happened to them. Some of the reports included things like burns, which could have been caused by the jets of a UFO or potential face-to-face alien interference. Bafflingly, they also confirmed that women who had come into contact with aliens shortly fell mysteriously pregnant after the event, with no explanation as to why they were suddenly with child. Yes, we all know by now how mommy and daddy make babies, but that apparently wasn't a factor in these cases. Alien babies potentially on the way. Number 8. FLIR. Alongside these 1,500 documents, 3 separate videos were released that appeared to show UFOs being spotted by the United States military, so let's take a look. The first is titled FLIR and was originally filmed back in 2004 when the USS Nimitz was flying off the coast of Southern California. There had apparently already been an unidentified aircraft in the area for up to a week before the video was filmed. Off the coast, they spotted a large oval-shaped object, estimating it to be about 40 feet long and white in color. 4 people on the craft saw the object for a running total of about 5 minutes, although the video is only just over a minute. They were able to track it using their advanced infrared camera, and due to the object's shape, they nicknamed it the Tic Tac. All these videos to this day have no real explanation for what the UFOs actually were. Number 7. Gimbal. Next up on the list we have the video titled Gimbal, which was leaked alongside the last one I just talked about. This one's different because we can hear the people in the jet reacting to what they're seeing. They use a similar infrared camera and follow the object that was flying over the East Coast. At first, they comment that it might be some kind of drone, but then note that it is fighting against incredibly strong winds and appearing to not be affected by it at all. They even comment that there are other unidentified crafts in the area, but we don't actually see them as it's locked onto the target. What's interesting about this one, as the people in the video point out, is that it moves in an incredibly strange fashion, appearing to rotate and move around despite the heavy winds it's apparently fighting against. My favorite part of this is that there's one guy calmly stating facts about it while the other cusses and yells in excitement. Is that a f***ing drone, dude? Number 6. Go fast. The third and final leaked video is probably the best of the bunch, as the video starts before they have managed to lock onto the target and you can see it moving. The video is pretty correctly titled Go Fast because this thing is moving incredibly fast, like definitely faster than anything else that could have been an easy explanation. It's zipping over the top of the water as they try to get their camera to lock onto it, and when they finally do, they start cheering because of just how difficult it was due to how fast the object was moving. Their comments are a mix of excitement and confusion in regards to what they've managed to find, saying, "Look at that thing fly," while also going, "What the f is that thing?" People often like to write off UFOs as some sort of secret military practice vessels or training project, so what can it be when the military itself doesn't know what they saw?
And we're going to start things off with Point Dume underwater base. So off the coast of Point Dume in Malibu, there seems to be this mysterious structure lying about 6 miles underwater. Images captured on Google Earth show an oval-shaped object resting on the seabed floor. Looks like it has a large flat top and what seems to be pillars or columns. Looking at it, it definitely looks like the entrance to something. It sits about 2,000 feet beneath the ocean surface, spanning nearly 3 miles in width, and some speculate that it could be more than just a naturally formed structure, and yes, some even think it could be an underwater alien base. Jimmy Church, who hosts a California-based radio show called Fade to Black, was pretty excited about the images, stating, "My first impression was that it was Greek. It looked artificial and didn't look natural. When you're looking at it from above, it's a nearly perfect oval shape. In the natural surroundings, nothing is symmetrical. Everything is eroded and covered in rocks and sloping and peaking. And right here, for 2 miles, it is a perfect oval with a black separation or outline to it. It just stands out that it has to be some type of roof. It's not unlike a domed stadium or a covered indoor racetrack or an Olympic arena. It's got that feel to it. It looks like a perfect oval man-made structure sitting on a construction site. Next up, we have the Solomon Islands UFOs. There have been some very strange things said to go on here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and not only have locals claimed to see strange lights in the sky, but also coming up from under the water as well, which has led to a pretty intense theory that there could be an underwater alien base there. There have always been local legends of monstrous giants on the islands, 10-foot tall, hairy creatures with flat noses and glowing red eyes. That, combined with the reports of strange lights in the sky, moving with incredible speed and agility, could mean there may be some kind of connection here. You see, some of these lights and strange flying objects have been seen descending down into the trees of the Guadalcanal or rising up from the ocean and zipping around before diving back down. There are also legends that these giants that are said to live on the island move around through subterranean tunnels. So some speculate that beneath the surface of the ocean is this hidden structure where extraterrestrial beings may be conducting their activities. Next up, we have Hy Brasil, a small mythological island off the coast of Ireland. According to Celtic folklore, this island is said to lie off the west coast of the country, appearing only every 7 years, usually surrounded by mist. The island is often described as a paradise with advanced technology and a society living in total harmony with nature. Sailors and explorers have reported spotting the island for centuries, claiming to have seen strange creatures and these glowing godlike beings there. Maps from the 14th to the 19th centuries often included Hy Brasil, but its exact location was always a bit of a mystery. Now, of course, it sounds like complete folklore, which Celtic culture is absolutely full of, but what if there's something else going on here? Well, some have suggested that the islands appearing and disappearing could have an extraterrestrial connection. The idea is that aliens could be using advanced cloaking technology or have a hidden base on or beneath the island, and the mysterious creatures that some sailors claimed to have seen on the island do sound like they could be alien-like, but it's still a total mystery as to what they'd be doing over there. Next up on the list, we have strange skulls that were found in an underwater cave in Mexico. So in 2012, divers were exploring a cenote and the Yucatan Peninsula where they came across 2 chambers full of human bones, and some of these bones were human skulls, but there was something off about them. They were elongated. Now, the ancient Maya were said to have performed human sacrifices in the area, and skull deformation was also practiced in various parts of Mexico way back when. There are theories as to why, but nothing entirely concrete. One idea is that high-ranking members of society had elongated skulls. Some say that people's skulls were elongated just to differentiate certain groups from one another, but there's also the theory that these skulls never belonged to human beings at all. Pretty common knowledge, of course, that there are tons of conspiracy theories surrounding the ancient Maya, including the presence of extraterrestrials that may have helped them construct all their intricate advanced cities. So could these skulls have belonged to these supposed alien beings? It's possible. Next up, we have the Lake Baikal incident. So this lake in southern Siberia is the world's largest freshwater lake by volume. It's incredibly deep, and there are some pretty eerie stories about it. First of all, there's all the mysterious lights that are reported, not just hovering or flying above it, but also coming from the depths of the water. And there's a very creepy story that was supposedly an attempted cover-up by the Russian government. So in 1982, a team of Navy divers were doing a routine diving exercise in the lake when a number of them started spotting something pretty disturbing. There were all these figures deep under the water. They were tall and slender, well over 6 feet tall, and wearing what looked to be silver suits. Those suits could have also been silvery scales. They also had large, circular, glowing, unblinking eyes. The creatures began chasing after the divers, or swimming after them, rather, and the divers panicked and then swam back up to the surface, and they reported what they'd seen to their superiors, but that's where the story ends. The existence of the strange creatures has never been confirmed or denied.
The first image is a screen grab from a video filmed by a US Marine officer on the 20th of April in 2021 on a military base in 29 Palms, California. After the release of the photograph, multiple Marines came forward to confirm the existence of an aircraft, saying that while the photo showcases only the triangle-shaped formation of bright lights, in person the men were able to make out the black body of the aircraft as well. The unidentified flying object is said to have hovered for 10 minutes in the air before it suddenly vanished without any trace. The men were able to rule out flares for being the cause of the mysterious lights, but were never able to figure out exactly what they saw that night. However, it appears the footage has not been taken lightly, as the Pentagon has started an investigation into just what exactly was seen on the night of April 20th of 2021 in the skies above the 29 Palms military base. Next up, we have a series of photographs taken by cosmonaut Ivan Vanger in August of 2020 whilst aboard the International Space Station, that appears to depict 5 unidentified flying objects flying at the same speed while maintaining the same distance between each other as well as their surroundings, moving in a straight line just above the Earth's curved horizon visible in the night sky. Vanguard, both surprised and curious, took to Twitter, now named X, to share the footage in hopes of getting some clarity as to exactly what he was looking at. In an exciting unfolding of events, his tweet was picked up by the Russian space agency Roscosmos, and a spokesperson revealed that experts were in fact studying the video in an attempt to determine what exactly Vanguard had managed to capture. Did you guys know that Japan was a major hotbed for UFO activity? Because I didn't. But apparently the Pentagon does? In fact, UFO sightings are so common in Japan that its military has reportedly ordered all pilots to disclose any and all identified flying objects directly to the Japanese government. Not only that, but Japanese self-defense forces have also undergone extensive training in relation to UFO sighting protocol. To date, 6 alleged encounters between pilots and UFOs have been reported to the Japanese government, one of which was recorded, and depicts 10 white circular balls flying through the skies of Osaka in Japan. While the government has yet to publicly comment on any of the incidents, the update of self-defense protocol alone is pretty telling. The next image was shared by a pretty reputable source, National Geographic. The image was captured by Sergio Loaiza on September 4th of 1971 during an aerial survey of Lake Kote. Everything seemed pretty normal until the photos were taken back to Loaiza's development lab, where he noticed something very strange. A metallic flying aircraft, estimated to have a diameter of 160 feet, was located in the corner of one of the photographs. When he presented the photos to his superiors at the National Geographic Institute, they shut him down quick, forbidding Sergio as well as his colleagues from sharing any information of what they had seen that day. In 1979, however, the photograph was leaked, and the object that appeared in the image was officially classified as an unidentified flying object. In 2021, the existence of the object was again confirmed after the original copy of the photograph was scanned, and it was revealed that the UFO's presence was more than just a scratch on the lens or a piece of dust in the wind. So what do you think it was? Let us know in the comments. Next up, we have footage that comes to us straight from the declassifieds. Remember how I told you at the beginning of the video that the government quite literally copped to the fact that they have been hiding the existence of UFOs for years? Well, they did, and they came with receipts. On the 15th of January in 2023, while surveilling an MQ-9 Reaper aircraft, an unidentified aerial presence was captured moving at speeds unreachable by any of Earth's modern-day technological advances. Not only this, but as the object whizzed through the field of view of the camera lens, it appeared to leave behind an atmospheric wake before disappearing completely into the sky. Guys, if you have any, please leave your UFO and alien stories in the comments. I would love to hear about your experiences with any of these kind of things. Next up, we have arguably the most beautiful alien assuming photograph I have ever seen. The photo was taken in 2004 by a retired Royal Air Force officer while on vacation in Sri Lanka. The site was described described as some kind of colorful giant donut in the sky with hues of oranges, pinks, purples, and whites. After its capture, the photograph was turned into the Royal Air Force Flying Dales Base in North Yorkshire in England, where it became a classified document held by the Ministry of Defense. The image has since been declassified, of course, and is now available for public viewing, but there is still a lot of mystery surrounding the photo as well as the photographer, as his identity, along with any other information regarding the incident, is pretty much non-existent. I mean, come on, it's a giant glowing light in the sky. You're really telling me no one else saw this and that there's no other information out there other than the fact that the photo exists? Oh, yeah, and not only that, but it was deemed classified by the British Ministry of Defense, so I'm thinking there's something else going on here. Okay, I bet you didn't know that another major hotbed for extraterrestrial, UFO, and unidentified aerial phenomenon activity was Brazil. I mean, I did, but maybe you didn't. In fact, this kind of thing is so popular in Brazil that they have an annual day of recognition for these sightings known as the Night of the UFO, which came to be after a major event took place in 1986. On the night of May 19th, a series of unidentified flying objects were seen in the skies of Brazil, and even more non-visual objects were detected via radar across the skies of 4 Brazilian states. Of course, at this time, any and all knowledge the government had on the event was extremely classified. In May of 2012, however, Brazil's Freedom of Information Act went into place, after which the public demanded the release of all the documents relating to the incident. The government complied, and not only released written documents of the events, but also a series of photographs depicting strange activity within the skies above Brazil. Although the images of what appeared to be nothing more than squiggles and clouds of smoke didn't provide much clarity, a statement made by the Minister of Aeronautics did. He said, "This command is of the opinion that the phenomena are solid and reflect, in a certain way, intelligence, due to the ability to follow and maintain a distance from observers, as well as to fly information." After this statement was made, the Brazilian government has still not been able to confirm exactly what took place the day the Night of the UFOs was born. Next, we have a photo taken in 1990 by 2 Scottish chefs who were working in a hotel near the area in which the photograph was taken. After a long day of work, it appears the 2 men had decided to take a hike in an attempt to blow off some steam. While this walk wouldn't end up being incredibly relaxing, it would be wildly exciting, as not long after the 2 men had set off on their journey along the Calvine Scottish countryside, they noticed something hovering above them in the sky. The object was not one that either of the men could identify, and so they pulled out their cameras in an attempt to document the 100-foot flying aircraft instead. The photos, which have been analyzed and show no signs of manipulation, capture the object being circled by a jet plane. They thought the incident was incredibly strange and even newsworthy, so the 2 turned the footage over to the local newspaper for publication, but the images were seized by the British Ministry of Defense and were never released. Until 32 years later, that is, by David Clark, who, unbeknownst to the ministry, had kept a photocopy of one of the original images. The identity of the 2 men was never revealed, nor did they ever come forward to share their story after the images had been seized by the ministry, begging the question of what exactly they saw and what exactly the government was trying to cover up. A photograph taken of an unidentified aircraft lit up by military spotlights in Los Angeles, California, is next on the list. The photograph, which documents an event so big it later became referred to as the Battle of Los Angeles or the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, was taken on February 23rd of 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. On the night the photo was taken, all of Los Angeles was under blackout, as directed by the US military. While the lights on the ground had been turned off, the sky above had been lit up by a myriad of strange objects. The military opened fire, and onlookers stood absolutely stunned as 1,400 rounds of ammunition appeared to have no effect on the unidentified flying object. Smoke filled the sky, and when it cleared, not a single craft was to be found in the sky or on the ground. Shrapnel that appeared to have ricocheted off the target resulted in the death of 5 civilians. Furthermore, 3 were killed in car accidents due to the chaos of the event, and 2 more of heart attacks due to the stress of the 2-hour-long attack. And finally, we have a handful of screen grabs from a video taken by Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich whilst flying an 18F Super Hornet fighter jet over the Pacific Pacific Ocean near San Diego during a training mission for the United States Navy. The footage, taken in November of 2004, was captured after Dietrich was asked to investigate a suspicious object that had been seen dropping from 80,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean and then vanishing. When Alex and their colleague arrived on the scene, the ocean's surface, where the object had been reported, appeared as though it was boiling. Moments after arriving to investigate, a strange, elongated white object came into view and was captured on video hovering above the water before it disappeared into the sky at an impossible speed, leaving no wake in the oceans below. While the footage has been confirmed to be authentic by the United States Department of Defense, the object itself, along with its origins, remains a mystery.
Next up, we have underwater alien bases in Alaska. So claims of alleged alien bases lurking beneath the waters off the coast of Alaska have been around for quite a while, but in recent years, the idea of them has become more of a popular thing, mostly thanks to Ancient Aliens. Thank you, Ancient Aliens. But apparently, there are even eyewitness accounts dating back several decades which have been mostly undisclosed until recently. UFOologists and UFO enthusiasts have now been turning their attention to the mysterious activities in the waters of Alaska. One incident dates back to 1945, when crew members of a ship reported spotting an unidentified craft. Researchers, including members of MUFON, or the Mutual UFO Network, which is a non-profit organization that studies reported UFO sightings, they think it's possible that extraterrestrial beings have been constructing bases beneath the ocean's surface, and that's because there are tons of reports of UFO movements over the water. There were also a number of UFO sightings in the 40s that weren't disclosed to the public at the time. These undisclosed reports allegedly provide evidence that there are extraterrestrial entities operating in the waters off the coast of Alaska. This next story comes to us from Reddit, and although what this person saw wasn't technically under the water, it was floating just above it, and it's a pretty fascinating account. The story comes to us from user Keslow, who writes, "I used to live in Charleston, South Carolina back around 2006, and I had a job that had me leaving home at about 4 a.m. I lived in a bad part of town near the International Airport Joint Base, so when I left, I did a scan of the area before getting into my car. One morning I stepped out of my home to do my scan and noticed that there were thin wispy clouds flowing in off the ocean. Basically, it was a thin fog about 1,000 to 1,500 feet up, moving like a river. I also noticed at this point that there were two effing moons. One is obscured by the thin clouds, our real moon, and the other is most definitely under the clouds. It was a sphere of glowing white light. It made no sound and did not move. After about 2 minutes, it bolted eastward towards the ocean. The glowing light faded quickly right as it took off as well. I've seen planes move near the speed of sound, and this thing went from 0 to like 3,000 miles per hour instantly. No acceleration. Much faster than the speed of sound with no sonic boom. I hope I don't see it again, especially on the water. I always wondered if it bolted because they saw me watching them." Next up, we have the strange reports of a large disc-like object being spotted in the Indian Ocean. Apparently, as far back as 1873, ships sailing the Indian Ocean from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea have reported spotting a massive mile-wide disc passing beneath their boats, accompanied by large, rotating lights. One of the earliest documented sightings happened on March 23rd of 1873, when the ship Adelaide traversed the South China Sea. Witnesses reported floating over a huge, glowing circular object beneath the ocean's surface. On May 15th, 1879, the crew of the HMS Vulture described the sighting of two large Ferris wheels spinning in opposite directions. The spokes of these wheels were reported to be 25 feet wide, with 100 feet of space between them. There have been tons of these reports in various locations in the Indian Ocean, over the years. On April 4th, 1901, for example, in the Persian Gulf, the crew of the SS Kilwa claimed to see rays of light emanating from an underwater disc-like object. And even in 1943, in the Persian Gulf, a sailor named Matthew Mangle reported a huge glowing disc beneath the water's surface, pacing his ship. And these are just a handful of examples. And coming in at second place is the Michigan Stonehenge. So in 2007, a professor of underwater archaeology, Mark Hawley, made a pretty incredible discovery. It was this arrangement of stones lying on the lake bed, looking a lot like Stonehenge in England. The stones are laid out in a circular pattern, and some even appear to be arranged in a line. They're about 40 feet below the surface of the lake. So what was the purpose of this formation? Could it be the remnants of an ancient civilization? Could extraterrestrials have constructed it thousands of years ago? They look like they've been placed in a pretty precise pattern. Doesn't look to be natural forming to me. And of course, there's also a rock with a mastodon carved into it. Hard to believe something like that would be created naturally. What's also really fascinating is that these stones are believed to be about 9,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by about 4,000 years. And finally, it's only natural that we finish things off with what has to be the most famous strange object discovered deep beneath the sea, the Baltic Sea anomaly. So back in the summer of 2011, a team of Swedish treasure hunters didn't come across any treasure in terms of monetary gain anyway, but they did find something pretty cool, a sonar image that seems to show a strange UFO-like object on the sea floor. Peter Lindbergh, the leader of the treasure hunting team, would be so awesome just to be able to say you're the leader of a treasure hunting team. I could say that and I'd just be like digging through my backyard finding nothing. But this guy actually goes out on boats and submarines and does it. I didn't get that job. Anyway, he's the leader of Ocean X and was pretty astonished by what he had found, saying the object definitely didn't look like a natural formation. And even though a number of researchers have come out and said it probably is a natural formation, I still get excited looking at this thing. I don't know, I'm just not entirely convinced. I'm on the fence about this one. But what do you guys think? Alien craft, ancient artifact, just some mundane natural formation? Let us know down in them comments.
Number 5, Pentagon report. In May of this year, the Pentagon appeared on a panel where they discussed UFOs, and they revealed just how much information they have about the situation. They said that there are around 400 separate reports of unidentified flying objects coming from military personnel. So while we do have the 3 leaked videos, there are likely even more locked up in a safe somewhere that offer convincing evidence of the existence of aliens. The Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence said, "We've seen an increasing number of unauthorized and/or unidentified aircraft or objects, and military control training areas and training ranges and other designated airspace. Reports of sightings are frequent and continuous." While it definitely sounds like he's trying to sweep it under the rug as someone just like flying a drone illegally onto a military base or something, I think it's safe to say the military have the resources to know if it were something as simple as that. So their confusion and uncertainty makes it seem more and more like aliens are among us. Number 4, live stream. In 2016, an incident occurred during NASA's live feed from a camera mounted on the International Space Station that pointed towards the Earth. You can see the Earth's curve, and one viewer noticed that for a short moment, a massive bright object can be seen falling towards the planet. But as quickly as it comes, it's gone as the live feed conveniently cuts out and experiences technical difficulties. The video was posted to YouTube, and people immediately started theorizing that NASA had intentionally cut the live feed at this moment to cover up the fact that this bright shape was a UFO, or at least something alien in origin. Many people noted how suspicious this was and started calling out NASA for their actions, while other people were saying that it was just a meteor or some hunk of space junk. A spokesperson for NASA said that the cameras are controlled automatically, and it had simply passed out of range, causing the video to be cut off. But that's just what they want you to think. Number 3, alien junk. An astrophysicist from Harvard wrote a book that was titled Extraterrestrial: The First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, and it was about how he believed that an object that passed through the solar system in 2017 was actually a piece of alien technology, bringing forward the theory that NASA is actually just ignoring real evidence of alien existence because they're just brushing it off as some random space junk. Whether they believe it really is space junk or they're they're just trying to make us think that that's what it is. The object was long and not shaped like any known comet we've ever seen before. It also apparently accelerated away from the sun, and he believes it ended up in our solar system accidentally thanks to aliens, saying, "A buoy, a grid of pods for communication, other intelligent living organisms, defunct technology, or discarded technological trash. These are all plausible explanations." Number 2. Buzz Aldrin. Buzz Aldrin was one of a handful of astronauts who were aboard the Apollo 11, the first spaceflight that put humans on the moon with one small step for man. During their journey, however, they saw more than just the moon. Apparently, they may have seen a UFO. They reported seeing large objects that appeared to follow alongside them. It was confirmed not to be the upper stage of the rocket that would have been detached, as this was 6,000 miles away from them at the time. The event was kept under wraps and nobody talked about it until it was brought up years later, sweeping it under the rug as simply a panel that had disconnected from the ship. But again, that's just what they want you to think. The claims coming from a senior NASA scientist who said he had just called up Buzz on the phone and he had agreed. Did you really talk to him on the phone, senior NASA scientist? Did you really? Number 1. ISS report. Alright, this one's not actually NASA because it actually comes from a Russian astronaut aboard the International Space Station, and I'm just gonna count it because it's a pretty cool video. He was on board the ISS using his camera to record the southern lights, which are the same as the northern lights but in the south. It's a time-lapse recording, and for a brief moment you can see a line of large bright lights moving across the sky. In the tweet the astronaut posted, he referred to them as space guests, saying that while it was only a few seconds in the time-lapse, it was actually around 52 seconds in real time. Some people suggest that it may have been some kind of meteor or satellite, but I'm actually a licensed professional and I say that it was aliens.
Next up is the Cash Landrum incident. On the evening of December 29th, 1980, Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's grandson Colby Landrum were driving home to Dayton, Texas after dining out when they encountered a mysterious diamond-shaped object emitting flames and intense heat. It was floating above the trees. At first, Landrum, thinking it was a sign of the second coming, told Cash to stop the car. Cash considered turning back, but the road was too narrow. The object was described as intensely bright, with small blue lights descending toward the road, emitting flames periodically. Cash and Landrum had gotten out of the car to look at the object, but got back in when the heat became more and more intense. It got so bad that it burned Cash's hand when she touched the car. Landrum even left a handprint on the dashboard. Then the object started ascending again, and after it was back up in the air, a group of military helicopters surrounded it. So after making it back home that night, the three started feeling off, reporting symptoms like nausea and skin burns after the encounter, with Cash experiencing severe health issues, including large blisters and clumps of her hair falling out. Vicki developed a cataract, and Betty was diagnosed with cancer later on. Symptoms resembling radiation exposure, really looks like. The two went on to seek legal action, suing the US government for $20 million, but the case ended up being dismissed.
Alright, next on our list we have the Gorman incident. In October of 1948, Second Lieutenant George F. Gorman was flying a P-15 Mustang aircraft during a training flight. Everything seemed to be going pretty routine until he noticed a strange object in the sky. At first he assumed it to be some type of weather balloon or other kind of experimental aircraft, but as he flew closer to the object to get a better observation, he realized it was something entirely different. He described it as some kind of pulsating, glowing ball of light. He tried to fly away from it, but to his surprise, the object began to follow him. Gorman tried to outmaneuver the unidentifiable flying object, but he was unsuccessful. He claimed that it appeared as though the UFO could anticipate his moves before they even happened. After a while, Gorman began to get seriously freaked out, and in a final attempt to lose this strange glowing ball, he decided the best plan of action was a nosedive. He dove the plane directly towards the ground, and after a 27-minute chase, he was able to lose the object. He leveled out his plane and lived to tell the tale. But no one, including Gorman, knows exactly what was seen in the sky that day. But what's even crazier is that after the incident, his plane tested positive for radioactivity. No one knows why. That's so wild.
Next on the list is the Alderney UFO sighting. On April 23, 2007, pilot Ray Boyer and his passengers observed a strange light while flying near Alderney. At first he thought it was reflected light, but soon realized that it was an object, estimating its size to be about a mile wide. He described it as bright yellow gold with black bands on the side. He also spotted a second object, similar but further away. Boyer reported the sighting to authorities, labeling it a near miss. Now, despite his report, the British Ministry of Defense didn't carry out an investigation, stating it occurred in French airspace. Witnesses on Boyer's aircraft and another pilot from Blue Islands confirmed seeing similar objects. One described it as sunlight colored and another as an elongated oval.
Next up, we have a UFO sighting at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. The incident took place at 4:15 p.m. on November 7th of 2006, so it's actually pretty recent. 12 different airport employees reported seeing a large saucer-shaped, unidentified flying object hovering over one of the airport gates, gate C-17 to be exact. And it was actually hovering above another aircraft that had been set to depart O'Hare but was delayed because there was a giant flying saucer hovering above it. Duh. The pilots in the plane, along with mechanics on the ground and airline management, reported to have seen the object. But air traffic controllers, however, did not see it because for some reason the craft above the plane was not picked up on their radars. The UFO was visible for several minutes before it suddenly disappeared. And even though the incident had many credible witnesses and was later investigated by the Federal Aviation Administration, no explanation was ever given regarding the events of the day.
Alright, Travis Walton case. So this story has it all. A UFO sighting corroborated by multiple witnesses and a supposed encounter with alien beings. So it was November 5th, 1975. Travis Walton and his fellow loggers had finished up their day in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. They loaded onto their truck and began the drive back home. They hadn't gotten far though when they noticed odd lights hovering above some trees. They decided to drive closer to see what was going on, and that's when they saw a massive unidentified object. Travis got out of the truck to see what the thing was, and then was suddenly lifted into the air by a beam of light. The rest of his friends drove out of there in a panic, but knew they couldn't leave him there. By the time they returned to the scene though, Travis was gone, and he would be missing for days. 5 days after disappearing, Travis Walton showed up again though. He placed a call to his sister's place from a phone booth outside of town. He was found disoriented and disturbed and began telling this horrifying story about how he'd woken up in a hospital-like room where two bald, alien-like entities were looking down at him. He tried to fight the creatures off, before a human being wearing a helmet led him to another room where 3 other humans put a plastic mask over his face. He then lost consciousness again before waking up by the side of the highway.
And to finish off our list today, we have the possible involvement of a UFO in the disappearance of an F-89C Scorpion jet fighter. The aircraft had been used in a training mission over Lake Superior in Michigan in 1953. It had left from the Kincheol Air Force Base, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, with 2 incredibly experienced pilots at its controls. As it tends to, everything was going smoothly until it wasn't. All of a sudden, the plane had disappeared from the tracking radars on the ground, and it was replaced by something else, an object that was moving around erratically and rapidly. Ground operators were unable to identify what it might be, but knew that it couldn't possibly be the missing aircraft due to its movements. Eventually, that object also vanished from the radar. An investigation was conducted on the disappearance of the jet fighter as well as the pilots on board, as well as the origin of the second radar detection. But it should come as a shock to none of you that the investigation revealed absolutely nothing. But officials did say that based on the pilot's level of expertise and the relatively easy nature of the flight, it's highly unlikely that their disappearance was an accident. But what do you guys think?
There are also witnesses aside from Brazel's claiming to have seen some strange things. So many of these witnesses stayed silent for years, but eventually began speaking out to close friends or family about what they'd seen, still fearing repercussions from the government. There was another crash site about 40 miles from Brazel's ranch where more wreckage and alien bodies were said to be being recovered. A firefighter who went to this site claimed that he saw a large disc in the ground and several small, non-human bodies nearby. He said that military officials told him to keep quiet about what he saw. Sergeant Melvin Brown also shared his experience. He said he rode in a truck with the bodies from the crash site to Roswell Field and then stood guard at the hangar where they were first kept. He was instructed not to look under a tarp, but he got curious and he peeked. He claimed he saw 2 alien bodies. The government has always denied his claims, but several people who were there or knew people who were there have said they saw wreckage and bodies arrive at Wright Field. Retired General Arthur Exon stated that a top secret committee was set up to oversee the investigation of this and other classified UFO incidents. After the Roswell crash, the debris was secretly flown from Fort Worth, Texas to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. At Wright Field, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Exon, who later became the base commander, recalled that some of the material was very thin, but incredibly strong. And it wasn't just metal that arrived at Wright Field either. At the second crash site a few miles from the first, they discovered a smaller, more intact craft and 4 bodies lying nearby. These bodies did not look human. Again, according to witnesses, the bodies were described as being in fairly good condition despite having been exposed for 6 days. Some parts of the bodies have been chewed on by animals. Descriptions from those who saw the bodies are pretty consistent. They were said to be 4 to 5 feet tall, with big heads, large eyes, and small mouths. Basically your classic idea of an alien. They had thin bodies with long arms and 4 fingers. An army nurse who worked on the initial autopsy described how fragile the skulls and bones were too. The bodies were quickly placed in large, sealed wooden crates, loaded onto a B-29 bomber and flown to Fort Worth before being sent to Wright Field.
Now, the general public weren't the only ones concerned with the Roswell crash. In fact, one of the highest members of government was too, the president, which at the time was Harry S. Truman. After the incident took place, Truman became increasingly interested and concerned with UFOs, so much so that in 1948 he called a meeting with his military aide, Colonel Robert Laundrie, in the Oval Office to discuss UFO reports and what they might mean for the security of the country. Laundrie told Truman that, quote, all manner of objects and things were being seen in the sky by people as of late, which only led the president to worry more about the possibility of new, never-before-seen threats to the American people. And so Truman ordered a quarterly oral report from both Laundrie and the Air Force to be presented to him at the White House to discuss whether or not the UFO sightings would present any kind of immediate danger. Although neither the military or the Air Force were ever able or willing to provide Truman with any answers, the UFO sightings kept coming and officials became more and more confused. To this day, it's unclear what information the government has gathered on UFOs, but what we do know is that if they do in fact have concrete evidence supporting the existence of alien life forms, they sure as heck aren't sharing it with us. Yet, fingers crossed.
The Roswell incident was the catalyst for pretty much every modern UFO conspiracy today. Before Roswell, the idea of aliens was just that, really, an idea. But when stories about this mysterious crash hit the papers, it really changed the public's view of the possibility of alien life forever. Suddenly, what people had read about in science fiction and fantasy novels or watched on the big screen was something a lot more concrete. Project Blue Book formed a few years after the Roswell incident, a genuine Air Force program dedicated to investigating UFOs, at least in the early days. Area 51, the mysterious Men in Black, Majestic 12, all of these things started being whispered about in the years following the Roswell incident. Now on to the stuff you've all been waiting for, of course, aliens and UFOs. Pine Gap has been a hotspot for conspiracy theories involving extraterrestrial research pretty much ever since it began operations. Some people are convinced that the facility is hiding evidence of alien life and is deeply involved in studying them and their technology. And this isn't just a situation of like, oh well, a big top secret government facility, gotta be aliens, right? No, there have been a lot of strange sightings in the area surrounding Pine Gap. Some people will even claim that Pine Pine Gap is part of a global network of secret bases that collaborate on extraterrestrial research. Again, the American involvement certainly plays into this, so Pine Gap may be another facility like Area 51, according to the conspiracy anyway, where captured alien technology is reverse engineered. This could mean everything from developing new energy sources to building advanced propulsion systems similar to ones aliens could be using. There's also rumors that Pine Gap has underground facilities specifically designed for housing alien artifacts and possibly even extraterrestrial beings themselves. Let's get into some detail on a UFO sighting specifically, shall we? One of the most talked about encounters at Pine Gap happened early in the morning on December 22nd of 1989. So 3 men were heading home after an all-night hunting trip when something out of the ordinary caught their attention. It was around 4:30 a.m. when they noticed what looked like a door. But it was camouflaged to blend into its surroundings. Suddenly it opened right in front of them, and from behind it there was a huge metallic gray disc. The disc moved slightly, hovering over the base for a few moments. The hunters stood there, frozen in shock, and watched as this disc shot upwards and then vanished into the sky. As they tried to process what they'd just seen, they saw the camouflage door slowly move back into place, sealing shut as if it had never been there. Pine Gap employs around 1,000 people, and most of them live in the nearby town of Alice Springs. The workers are a mix of Australian and US intelligence personnel, but Alice Springs has a large American population, thanks to Pine Gap obviously, and visitors and townsfolk will often say, if you ask any of these Americans about their jobs, the common answer you'll get is that they're gardeners. It's apparently so common that it's become kind of an inside joke. Are all these people who say they're gardeners really gardeners, or could gardener be a cover for the real work these individuals do at the facility? Some people think that these so-called gardeners are involved in secretive operations at Pine Gap. Gardening, it's a pretty low-key profession, makes for a pretty convenient front for intelligence personnel and want to avoid drawing attention. At least that's what I'd say if everyone else hadn't picked that front too. I mean, you know, baker, carpenter, plenty of jobs to pick from, guys. Weather control. No, Pine Gap isn't even safe from accusations of weather control. This theory is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The idea is that the facility has the capability to manipulate weather patterns using advanced technology to create or alter it. And maybe they have help from some of that alien technology they're reverse engineering. Again, even without the possible secret alien technology hidden inside, people see the sophisticated equipment combined with the secretive nature of the facility, and questions start to form in people's heads like, could they be playing God and screwing with the weather? Could they be using methods like cloud seeding or even more advanced techniques, creating rain in drought-stricken areas? That would be nice. Or maybe they're working on ways to weaponize the weather. The concept of weather control isn't entirely far-fetched either. Various governments have been known to have explored weather modification in the past. The star system where these aliens are supposedly from has been at the center of some of the most famous alien abduction stories in history, including the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. Were these beings from Serpo, Ebens, or Greys, as they're typically called, responsible for abductions like this? The Barney and Betty Hill case is pretty interesting. In September of 1961, this American couple was driving through rural New Hampshire at night when they noticed strange lights in the sky that seemed to be tracking their car's movements. Barney decided to stop the car to get out and have a look, and what he allegedly saw were humanoid figures peering out from a hovering craft. The Hills peeled off as fast as they could, but they later realized they'd lost a pretty hefty chunk of time that they just didn't remember. But as the days passed, they started to remember things. They ended up reporting being taken aboard a UFO where they were subjected to medical examinations by beings described as small, with gray skin, oversized eyes, and tiny little anime mouths, that's the exact way they described it back then. It's a 60s term, anime mouths. Their account was one of the earliest descriptions of the now iconic image of your classic gray alien.
Of course, a regular mission to space is no walk in the park, but a mission to a faraway planet located in a star system entirely separate from our own, That's tough. And apparently so was the training process. It took an entire year of survival, escape, evasions, weapons, and psychological training for the 12 astronauts to become fully prepared for their mission. The crew consisted of scientists, linguists, pilots, 2 doctors, and a security officer. Over the course of a year, along with the standard training, one by one, each member of the crew was buried in a 6 by 5 foot box and kept there for 5 days as part of a training intensive. There was no light, no communication. Just a small air hole that allowed the astronauts to receive food and water and not suffocate to death. It was tough, but they all passed, and the pilots even went on to learn how to operate alien spacecrafts. When it came time to take off, the 12 astronauts, along with 40 tons of gear, which included 10 motorcycles and 3 jeeps, were loaded into the spacecraft using anti-gravity technology, and 1 EBIN came along to assist in their journey. When the ship was all boarded, each astronaut went to their own individual pod and settled in for the long journey ahead.
Alright, before we get to, what they saw on that journey, let's have a little bit of fun here and talk about something that comes up more than you'd probably think when Project Serpo or just interactions between aliens and humans is discussed. Hybrids. Yeah, aliens creating human-alien hybrids, either through experimentation or, God forbid, actually getting it on. This kind of thing always feels like it's going down the same rabbit hole that creepy online fan fiction does, where it's like, I'm gonna write about my fantasy of Alf impregnating Willie Tanner. I don't know. I'm not trying to shame, live your lives, but the concept of humans and aliens breeding with each other always feels inherently silly to me. With that said though, this does often play into the Project Serpo conspiracy. Those astronauts were apparently on this planet for a while. Who knows who they met? One thing could have led to another. Plus, in all these reported UFO abduction cases, who knows what kind of nasty experiments those Greys could have been doing.
When the crew arrived at Serpo, the first thing they noticed was that it was barren, bright, and hot. Really hot. About 107 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 degrees Celsius. Quickly, they realized why. Planet Serpo had 2 suns, which are shown here in a photograph taken by one of the astronauts, allegedly. One of the suns was orbited by Serpo, and the other was off in the distance. Because of this, the planet never got dark, and the days were 40 hours long, meaning that their decade-long mission was actually going to take 13 human years. In total, there are about 650,000 EBINs living on the planet in small, separate village communities and houses made of some kind of concrete rubber substance. It was a primitive life, but at the same time, the EBINs were equipped with electricity and incredibly advanced technology. Families generally consisted of a male and female EBIN, and each family was allowed to have a maximum of 2 children, which were hidden away until they reached the age of maturity. During their time on Serpo, the astronauts gathered as much information about the EBINs as they could. And if you guys remember, I do believe I mentioned that one of the astronauts died on transit. Apparently the EBINs used that astronaut to clone and create hybrids of, like James mentioned. And it was then that the remaining astronauts realized that they weren't as peaceful as they once thought them to be. When it came time to return home, for some reason, 2 of the astronauts actually decided to stay, and then 2 more astronauts died on the way back to Earth. The surviving astronauts were given a large sum of money and an entirely new identity. That's great and all, but many of them were suffering from radiation poisoning due to the 2 suns and died soon after their return to Earth.
One of the most avid supporters of the Project Serpo conspiracy is a man named Richard Doughty, who we can't really talk about Serpo without talking about this guy. See, Richard Doughty has made some pretty outlandish claims, so outlandish that there's a whole other conspiracy that spawned around him and other government officials like him. Supposedly, Doughty was the man behind those anonymous emails I talked about earlier. Richard Doughty is a retired special agent who used to work for AFOSI, the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation. But a lot of people think he wasn't actually investigating UFOs, but that he was part of a team spreading misinformation intentionally, basically muddying the waters and leaking supposedly secret info about the government's exchange program with alien beings in order to confuse the public, making it hard for us to tell what's real or not. Of course, the purpose behind the misinformation is, of course, to distract everyone from the actual nefarious things the government is up to. I mean, who doesn't get excited about aliens, right? I'm sure we'd all rather believe that the worst thing the government is doing is working with extraterrestrials instead of them doing some shady stuff at our own expense. Could there be some genuine truth about the planet Serpo thing? I mean, sure, maybe, but you know, just something to keep in mind with stuff like this. And now that we've dove into what this organization is, the history of it, who could have been involved, let's get into some of the criticism. We can't talk about Majestic 12 without mentioning the highly controversial Cutler-Twining memo. So I mentioned Jamie Chandere before, who'd received an envelope with photos of documents detailing MJ12. Well, just a year later in 1985, he and two other well-known UFOologists, Shanton T. Friedman and Bill Moore, had been on the hunt for declassified files in the National Archives when they apparently received a series of anonymous messages leading them to a very interesting document. The memo is a one-page document dated July 14, 1954. It was allegedly written by Robert Cutler, who was President Eisenhower's national security advisor, and addressed to General Nathan Twining. Twining was a high-ranking Air Force officer, which makes this memo a pretty big deal if it's real. The document briefly mentions MJ12 and talks about a meeting which some people think was related to UFOs and alien technology. People who believe in MJ12 and UFO cover-ups saw this as a major piece of proof that MJ12 was real and involved in hiding information about UFOs. Here's where it gets controversial though. There are several problems with this memo. First, there's no official record of a meeting on the date mentioned in the memo. Second, the style and format of the memo don't match the official documents from that time. Even the typeface used is apparently off. Another big issue is that Robert Cutler was actually out of the country on the date the memo was supposedly written. A lot of these arguments were brought forward by a UFO researcher and skeptic named Philip J. Klass and the FBI. But Klass was often labeled as a disinformation agent by conspiracy theorists. And again, even the FBI chimed in though. The FBI dug into the Cutler-Twining memo and other supposed MJ12 documents. They began their investigation in 1988 after receiving copies of these supposed documents. There were apparently discrepancies in the language and terminology that would have been used in a document like this. Another big issue was the content of the documents themselves. The FBI stated that the information seemed out of place. It seemed to be suspiciously tailored to fit the UFO conspiracy theories that were very popular in the 80s, rather than reflecting what would have been talked about at the time the documents were supposedly formed. It just seemed like someone had written them with modern UFO enthusiasts in mind, rather than being a genuine historical document. So in the end, the FBI declared the MJ12 documents to be falsified and wrote bogus on them with big bold letters. But did this really sway anyone who was highly skeptical of the government in the first place? Yeah, not really. And I mean, fair enough. It would make sense for an intelligence and security service organization like the FBI to cover up or downplay something like this. So, does MJ12 still exist? Did they ever exist at all? Well, they may or may not, but if the whole thing is fake, then how and why was this conspiracy concocted? Well, the first thought is that it's just UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists looking too deeply into things and spotting things that aren't really there, but there's another possibility. I mentioned the UFO researcher Bill Moore earlier, who was one of the big names involved in the unearthing of these supposed MJ12 documents. Well, he actually started changing his tune about this whole thing. Moore thought that the government was covering something up. It just may have not been aliens, unfortunately. Instead, he thinks the whole thing was drummed up by the United States government as part of a mass disinformation campaign. The purpose? To distract the public from top secret Air Force projects that were really going on. It makes sense. People would get so excited by the idea that the government was interacting with extraterrestrials that they'd be totally blind to the actual nefarious stuff the government was working on. But there's another aspect to this theory as well. What if the disinformation campaign was formed by the government in order to lessen people's interest in aliens and UFOs? What do I mean by this? Well, think about it. The government creates the documents, lets the public obsess over them, then discredits them to make the whole topic of UFOs look silly. Purpose of this? UFOs and aliens really are existing and they just don't want the public to be focusing on it. Hey, who knows?
Another theory, however, states that Earth is actually the birthplace of all life, all aliens. It's the incubation theory that, to put it quite simply, states that Earth is an incubation ground for all life in our universe, and that once a civilization reaches a point of high enough intelligence, they leave to colonize other planets. If this is true, it makes sense why aliens who have gone through the same process wouldn't want to interfere with our own. This is our chance to prove to the rest of the universe that we are not the runts of the litter, but that we have the capabilities to evolve into a species that can branch out into the universe on our own. The same way people who make documentaries about nature aren't supposed to step in when a lion tries to eat a gazelle, there is an unspoken rule that prohibits aliens from interfering with our development until we have reached that final stage. And then of course there is zoo theory, which is similar to incubation theory in that aliens have decided not to interfere with our existence, but different in that zoo theory does not follow the notion that all life in the universe began and evolved on Earth. What's neat, or perhaps terrifying, about zoo theory is that it covers the idea that while we have not yet been able to observe extraterrestrial life forms ourselves, they have certainly been able to observe us, and they've been doing it for centuries. If this really is the case, I wonder if Earth is the entire zoo, or just one of many exhibits in a giant cosmic roadside attraction called the Milky Way. It's anyone's guess, really. Now, much like how in order to communicate with aliens via signal beam, we would have to send our communications to the exact right spot at the exact right time, the reason why we haven't seen aliens could just be a timing issue. It's entirely possible that aliens existed long before our current time. Maybe they were around for the beginning of humanity, and maybe they even visited Earth early on in order to aid with some architectural projects like the pyramids and Stonehenge, but now they're gone. Extinct, dunzo, we missed them, and they're not coming back. I feel like this theory makes a fair bit of sense when you consider the references made in ancient texts to godly humanoid figures that are now, for some reason, nowhere to be found. Perhaps extraterrestrial life forms knew they were dying out and stopped on Earth to keep their existence from becoming nothing but stardust. On the other hand, of course, perhaps we aren't late, but we're early. According to Abraham Leob of Harvard and Rafael Batista and David Salone of the University of Oxford, the chances of life on other planets is actually set to grow much higher in the distant future. I mean, life on Earth developed 30 million years after the Big Bang, and it's still in the early stages. So who's to say that in another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 million years, the galaxy won't be teeming with various intelligent life forms spread out across the cosmos? I mean, it makes sense, but so do the rest of these theories. Anyways, the likelihood of us being alone in this universe is slim, but the likelihood that we are lone intelligent beings in this universe, because the rest of life is still in single-celled stage 1, is much more probable. The dark forest hypothesis is another possible reason for our lack of alien communication. Basically, the hypothesis states that the reason we have not yet crossed paths with any other life form is due to a drive towards self-preservation and a fear of being destroyed by another hostile, undetected civilization. I mean, to be fair, if I were part of a peaceful, albeit guarded, civilization making my way through the cosmos, and I stumbled upon humanity, I would 100% be absolutely terrified. We're scary, there's no denying it, don't even try. And what if there is another civilization out there even scarier than us? I don't want us to be looking in the wrong cosmic corner one day and accidentally run into our doom. Like, you wouldn't go looking into the corners of a dark forest to figure out what's lurking there that could possibly kill you, so why are we doing it in our universe? Furthermore, it's likely that out of this sphere, extraterrestrial species are not only not looking for us, but also actively working against being found. But then again, on the other hand, maybe aliens don't exist and we really are alone, floating through the vastness of space, inching closer and closer to our impending doom that will one day come in the form of a massive quasar swallowing our galaxy whole.
This next one has to be the wildest alien encounter case in recent history. So in March of 2023, something strange went down in a small Bolivian village called Horania. It all started with reports of a mysterious green light hovering in the sky. People whipped out their phones to capture the event, having no idea what the hell they were looking at. But unlike a lot of your typical UFO cases, this one doesn't just end with people seeing something strange in the sky. Things get way weirder. So 2 days later, residents claimed to have seen tiny beings darting around the town at night. One villager, Rita Marquez, described them as little and almost like goblins. Some locals even claimed to have found one of these small creatures dead in a gutter one morning, only for its body to vanish soon after. So, a lot to unpack here. Strange lights, possible aircraft, little beings running around the streets at night, and even a mysterious disappearance of one of these dead creatures. I don't know what to make of this case. Whenever there's a whole bunch of witnesses like this, I find it very interesting though.
Next up, we have Barney and Betty Hill's extraterrestrial encounter, which took place on September 19th of 1961 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where the couple claimed to have been abducted by aliens. The ordeal started when the pair saw a bright light in the sky around 10:30 p.m. while driving home after a night out. Betty asked Barney to stop the car so that they could get a better look. He did, and then pulled out a pair of binoculars. What they saw was a massive, oddly shaped spacecraft with multicolored lights. They tried to drive away, but the spaceship, which they believed to have been at least 40 feet long, followed them, getting closer and closer until it was hovering directly in front of the pair's car. Barney claims he was able to clearly make out 6 to 8 humanoid figures standing on the ship who instructed Barney and Betty not to move, but rather to just keep looking towards the ship. The next thing the pair remembered, they had driven 35 miles away from their destination with no recollection of doing so. They tried to write down as much as they could about the experience on their way home, but their memories quickly became fragmented. It wasn't until years later, under hypnosis, that the pair separately both recalled being taken onto the ship and then separated from one another and examined by the humanoid alien life forms. In the days after the incident, however, both Betty and Barney's watches stopped working, and Barney noticed tiny, circles on the back of his truck, and when he put his compass near them, it went haywire. So, I'm not saying they were telling the truth, but I think they might have been telling the truth.
This next story is very outlandish, but it's an entertaining story, and I haven't talked about it before, so here it goes. Back in 2021, Angelina Lynn Johnston held a news conference in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Johnston claims to be a former retired defense intelligence officer who had an encounter with various alien species at a secret base in the Mojave Desert. She claimed that in January of 2010, a few years before she ran as a Democrat candidate for South Dakota Senate, she had met up with a couple in South Carolina who ended up taking her to this secret base. She didn't provide details on exactly where the base was in the desert, but said that she would be taking an astronaut along with a few scientists to the base, which had been built into the side of a mountain. She described seeing various alien species, including one that looked a bit like a praying mantis type creature, and that the beings all spoke to her through telepathy.
Next up, we have the Exeter incident, which took place in Exeter, New Hampshire in 1965 and actually inspired a best-selling novel, Incident at Exeter: Unidentified Flying Objects Over America Now, by John G. Fuller. Not sponsored. One evening in Exeter, a police officer patrolling Highway Route 101 stopped to check on a woman parked on the side of the road. When he asked her what was wrong, she answered in breathless hysterics. She claimed that a large red flying object with flashing lights had been chasing her. Just a few hours later, the police heard a similar story from another man, a hitchhiker who claimed to have seen 5 bright lights in the sky while walking along Route 150. He told officers that they had been about 100 feet away from where he had stood, and he watched as they hovered over a home before moving over to the airspace above a large field, and then disappearing and reappearing several times. Curious, one of the policemen went with the hitchhiker back to the spot where he claimed to have seen the UFOs, and sure enough, there it was. And another officer arrived shortly after to see the exact same thing: 5 bright lights high up in the sky disappearing into and reappearing from the trees over and over again. And then, over the next few weeks, authorities in Exeter received almost 60 other reports of UFO sightings in the area. So, If you like aliens and UFOs and Exeter was not on your bucket list, you might want to rethink that decision.
Finally, we have a case where 3 UFOs hijacked a pilot's plane in midair. This is about as disturbing a close encounter as it gets, as this man just narrowly escaped death. The pilot's name is Carlos de los Santos. In 1975, he'd been flying back to Mexico City. It was just another routine flight until it wasn't. Carlos spotted something on his right wing. It was this silver disc-like object about 13 feet in length. It was just right on top of the wing. Then he saw an identical object on top of his left wing. And as if that wasn't enough, a third object appeared, and this one was heading straight for him. In a panic, Carlos tried to steer his plane away, but the controls weren't responding. Luckily, the object just missed him though. He frantically radioed air traffic control, explaining that he'd lost control and was surrounded by these strange disc objects. And then, to his complete and utter horror, the plane suddenly veered completely off course. It was now ascending higher and higher up into the sky. Carlos had absolutely no control over the plane now. But then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the strange objects flew away. And miraculously, thankfully, Carlos regained control of the aircraft. The 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, often referred to as the Washington Flap, is one of the craziest UFO reports in history. Over 2 weekends in July of that year, people in the capital began reporting a series of strange sightings in the sky. On the night of July 19th, radar operators at Washington National Airport picked up a cluster of unknown objects flying at incredible speeds. Ground witnesses described seeing bright lights darting around erratically. The following night, the sightings continued, and the US Air Force sent up fighter jets to chase the mysterious objects. Pilots in the jets reported seeing glowing lights that seemed to defy the laws of physics, making sudden accelerations and sharp turns that no conventional aircraft could replicate. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French was an investigator for Project Blue Book in the 50s. In 2013, during a citizen hearing on disclosure, he told a pretty wild story. While working for Project Blue Book, his job had often just involved debunking UFO sightings, but there was one incident that he had no explanation for. French recounted an incident had happened while he was investigating off the coast of St. John's, Newfoundland. Reports had come in about 2 mysterious aircraft that supposedly crashed in the water. French followed a group of around 100 onlookers gathered on a nearby wharf. What he saw next was something he'd never be able to forget. He described encountering 2 to 3 foot tall beings that were thin and gray, seemingly working on their damaged crafts in the water. French and the onlookers watched as these strange beings repaired their vessels right before his eyes. Then the craft lifted out of the water and shot off into the sky. He never included this sighting in his official reports at the time, probably fearing he'd be laughed out of his job. The Indian Ocean has a long history of mysterious sightings, with reports of strange underwater objects dating back as far as 1873. A number of sailors have described encounters with these massive, mile-wide discs lurking beneath the surface of the water, sometimes accompanied by eerie lights. One of the earliest documented sightings occurred on March 23, 1873, when the ship Adelheid was navigating the South China Sea. Crew members claimed to see this huge glowing circular object floating just below the water. And then, May 15, 1879, the crew of the HMS Vulture spotted 2 enormous Ferris wheel type objects spinning in opposite directions. Each spoke about 25 feet wide and spaced about 100 feet apart. On April 14, 1901, sailors aboard the SS Kilwa reported beams of light shining from an underwater disc-like object in the Persian Gulf. Then in 1943, a sailor named Matthew Mangle noticed a massive glowing disc keeping pace with his ship. Next on the list, we have the Rendlesham Forest incident. This one is very well documented. It took place in December of 1980 near the Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. Late at night on December 26th of 1980, military personnel witnessed strange lights descending into the forest. At first they figured it was just a downed aircraft, a known one. What they found definitely seemed to be an aircraft, just not one they'd ever seen before. They came across what seemed to be a metallic object on the forest floor and would see strange lights in the sky. Some reported that the object they saw was triangular and emitted strange beams of light. One of the airmen even claimed to have touched the object, There are official documents that have been released about this story with full reports by the military personnel at the site, and what they described was pretty strange. Now, did they actually encounter an alien spacecraft? It's debatable, but what is clear is that they saw something out of the ordinary. And finally, we have one of the most mysterious and destructive crash landings of all time, the Tunguska event. On June 30th, 1908, a massive blast hit this remote area of Russia. The event is believed to have been caused by the airburst of a large object of some kind, most likely a comet or asteroid, entering Earth's atmosphere and exploding in mid-air. The explosion released an enormous amount of energy and flattened about 80 million trees in the area. Now, luckily this happened in a very remote area, so only trees were affected, but that also means there were very few witnesses. A handful of people did report seeing a bright bluish light in the sky though, accompanied by a series of thunderous noises. And there's always been this question as to whether this was caused by a space rock or something else. Apparently there was also mutated plant life after this impact, and Joseph Stalin is rumored to have even conducted secret experiments in the area, but that's more of an urban legend. No one is exactly sure what this thing is. It's been dubbed the Wedge of Iud and was found in Romania in 1973. Workers came across it while digging during a construction project. It was found buried along with two large mastodon bones. The wedge is around 5 pounds and it's made of aluminum. Now this turns out to be pretty strange because aluminum wasn't widely used until the 19th century, but this thing is estimated to be much older, at least 250,000 years old. It's a very odd looking object. It looks like a modern art piece or something, but what exactly is it? Well, again, nobody really knows for sure, but one of the funnest theories, of course, is that it's extraterrestrial in origin, maybe having come off an ancient alien spacecraft or something.
The Sumerian Triumph Tapestry, which appears to not only depict the succession of various rulers to the throne, but also the presence of UFOs hovering above the Sumerian people, is next on our list today. The tapestry was created in the capital of West Flanders province in the Flemish region of Belgium around 1538, and since then it has been the subject of many conspiracy theories, which makes sense considering the two alien spaceship-looking objects depicted in the top left corner of the piece. Now, if you know anything about the Sumerian people or the Anunnaki, you are likely well aware that even without the presence of the Triumph Tapestry, the Sumerians are a pretty good argument for the legitimacy of aliens having had a pretty prominent presence on Earth in the past. Adding the tapestry into the mix is really just the cherry on top of the extraterrestrial cake, because it confirms how the Anunnaki, the ultra-intelligent alien species that ordered the creation of the pyramids, arrived on Earth in the first place. If you don't know anything about the Sumerians, ancient Sumeria, and the Anunnaki, but would like to, I do have a video on them titled Ancient Sumerian Mysteries that may never be explained that you can watch after this.
Next, we have the Casso artifact, known as one of the world's out-of-place artifacts. It was discovered in 1961 near Olancha, California. While out looking for geodes, these rock collectors found a strange rock that seemed out of place, and when they cut it open, they were surprised to find it actually had a metal core inside. The outer layer of the rock was encrusted with a hard substance, while the inner metal core was a cylindrical object that looked almost like a spark plug. This was not what anyone had been expecting to find, because the rock seemed to be millions of years old, far older than the age of modern machinery. So it sparked, see what I did there? It sparked a lot of curiosity. Some researchers think this is just a naturally occurring geode that somehow formed around a modern spark plug, but what if it's not the case? What if it's a piece of ancient technology left by an advanced civilization? Or even more interesting, an object that some extraterrestrial beings left behind a long time ago.
I'm sure by now we've all heard the theories that the pyramids were built by aliens, which is a fair assumption considering the fact that historians have been consistently unable to come up with an explanation as to how the construction of the pyramids would have been possible in ancient times. But what about other massive artifacts like Stonehenge, or perhaps the massive stone head that was found in the middle of the Guatemalan Amazon jungle in the 1930s. The statue dates back to before the Spanish Revolution, so prior to the Mayan and Aztec empires falling to the Spanish armies, which is strange considering 1, there is little to no way the Mayans living in the area could have sculpted the stone head and placed it in the area, and 2, if somehow they did, why doesn't it look like them? The statue's features do not mimic those of the ancient Mayans or Aztecs. Because of this, it is believed that the features once displayed on the head, which have since worn down due to revolutionary troops using the historic artifact as target practice, were actually the features of an ancient alien civilization that was far more intelligent than humanity, and that likely had a hand in the construction of the Mayan and perhaps even the Aztec empires as well.
This next one is actually 100% known to be from space. Back in June of last year, Harvard professor and theoretical astrophysicist Avi Loeb led an excavation to Papua New Guinea to uncover the remnants of a meteor that had crashed into the Pacific Ocean, and what they found were small spherical space rocks from deep in space, and there's still a question as to whether the object they came from was naturally occurring or not. What they do know is that the small spheres are made up of elements we don't have here on Earth. Loeb wrote, quote, "This is a historic discovery because it represents the first time that humans put their hands on materials from a large object that arrived to Earth from outside the solar system."
Finally, we have an incredibly mysterious extraterrestrial object discovered by the Betts family in 1974. That year, a mysterious fire had broken out on the family's property that destroyed 88 acres of woodland. When the Bettses went out to explore the area and search for the cause of the mysterious fire, they stumbled across a metal sphere with a diameter of just 8 inches and a weight of almost 20 pounds. At first, the family thought that the object might have belonged to the Soviet Union or perhaps NASA. They thought about leaving it where they found it, but curiosity got the better of them, and so they decided to take it home. About 2 weeks later, the family's son was playing guitar while sitting next to the strange spherical object when all of a sudden it began to emit a strange resonating sound that caused the family dog to act up. A while later, the family discovered that when they pushed the sphere across the floor away from themselves, it would change direction and return to the person who had pushed it. Not only that, but the object avoided being damaged at all costs, rolling up slanted tables to keep itself from crashing on the floor, and eventually it began emitting pulsing sounds seemingly out of nowhere. The strange behavior was witnessed by scientists as well as representatives from the military, so you don't just have to take the Betts family's word for it. At first, the Betts family refused to let the ball out of their possession, but after doors started slamming shut and music began randomly playing in their home, they handed it over to the authorities, who were shocked to discover that the metal ball was just that, a metal ball, or so it appeared. While there is no solid explanation as to why the sphere displayed such strange properties and caused so many strange things to happen, I think we can all agree that the most likely reason is because it came from outer space with a purpose that has yet to reveal itself to mankind. There you have it, folks.
We hope to catch you in the next video.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. It's about the top 100 objects that are not from this planet. Yep, we ranked all of the objects on the planet that scientists have confirmed are not from this planet. Click the video now to find out more.